gray. That was also proposed to be gravel, and that's where we remain in negotiation between the town's engineers and the applicant's engineers, how to resolve that. Because the code requires parking in that instance to be a hard surface, asphalt or concrete. To the west of that is going to be an enclosed patio where they will entertain and serve beverages and so forth. So those are some of the issues that we had on site as we process this application. I got my notes backwards, believe it or not. Architect. There's our landscape plan. So you can see there's significant improvements to the landscape. It'll actually be a very, very beautiful site once it's grown out and installed and grown. There'll be shrub cover along the east side of the property line to buffer the headlights and stuff that'll be parking facing east. Landscape for shade, landscape to define boundary lines and so forth. It'll frame the property, define the property. It'll also work with the height of the structure to minimize the height of the structure as well. There's a mix of evergreen and deciduous canopy trees and ground covers and so forth. So that is the proposed landscape plan. And again, architectural character, as you can see, it is a very unique structure. Envision that with some landscape and so forth. And I think you could see the possibility on this site, but it's going to remain pretty much as is. And one of the benefits of doing a site plan is we memorialize things on site. There's some things on site. I believe Connex storage containers and other things that our site plan will be able to memorialize and have a record of that. So, and again, we're working through the process with the applicant to include all those site features. Sidewalk will be installed along the east property line, along First Street. New curb and gutter will be put in lieu of what's pretty much not there now. Findings. Oh, that's a perspective provided by the applicant. So you can see it's a vast improvement over what is existing. And we hope it'll be a catalyst for improving that part of town and encourage other people to follow suit. Findings. We found that it's consistent with the comp plan to rehabilitate existing structures, historic structures in town, to grow and to develop business. The lot size is consistent with the plat, the old plat, I should say. There are multiple lots there, but again, it's consistent with the 1903 plat. No infringement on easements. Grade is consistent. We're working with the grade. Those are issues that we're negotiating with the applicant. And Article 4, the project complies with the LI, the zone district density, and again, it's an existing site. We are working with the client to address the issues of Article 5, which most of the site plan issues have been addressed from a planning perspective. Is the engineering, drainage, and oh, excuse me, I almost forgot to mention. Because this is going to serve alcohol, they also are required, I believe, by license to also serve food. Food in the town of Wellington requires some kind of grease control, grease trap, grease interceptor, whatnot. I believe there's currently a grease trap in the, in the site, in the building. That will be sufficient for what she proposes as her food service at this time. And that is to have it catered into the site, prepared and catered into the site. There will be no food preparation. There'll be no handling of food. Because once that gets into our drainage system, into our sewer system, then it can create issues with the wastewater treatment plant. So utilities requires a certain level of protection. And I believe the code was just amended this past spring to require of all food service facilities in the town. So,
Paul, can I jump in real quick?
sure.
What Mr. Whalen is referencing is our standard design criteria for engineering standards and utilities. And the food services that Mr. Whalen was alluding to, all food service establishments are required to install a grease interceptor, which is an in-ground 500 or 1,000 gallon tank to control grease, fats, oils, and other things that food service generates. That's to protect our utilities and our collection system and our treatment facilities. That's not a new requirement. There were other sections of Chapter 13 regarding utilities that were recently amended, but the grease interceptor requirement was an existing condition that was required previously. And so in this particular instance, again, kind of alluding to some of the things that Mr. Whalen has said and we presented earlier, existing conditions on the site, a grease interceptor wasn't installed previously. The new requirements would require a grease interceptor. The applicant is asked to provide an alternative means and methods for treatment of a limited food service that staff and our public works department has been willing to support. There is still some verification needed for sizing, fixture counts, make sure that what's proposed verifies the engineering standards in an interim basis. And this also gets to a condition of approval that was requested by staff to show on the revised site plans the location of a future grease interceptor, to demonstrate that it's feasible to install one when the time is needed where the food service expands and it would be required. Hopefully that helps provide some clarity on what the requirements were and what staff is proposing. Go ahead. Thanks, Paul.
But yeah, that was the one of the conditions of approval, was just to show a grease interceptor, future grease interceptor on the site plan. In response to utilities comments. So with that, I will conclude that property was platted in 1903. It's again exist and developed when there are pretty much no codes in existence. So this has been a challenge to take this site and try to bring it up to current code, fire department code, planning code, town code. I think we can all see the potential of what this could become. It's a historic landmark, very visible on the town skyline and so forth. It speaks of a foregone era in the town. We do feel that it's consistent with the land use code and the CMP to grow and develop and encourage local businesses to become more successful, to remain part of the town. So we recommend approval with the following conditions as stated in the staff report. And I will conclude that. Myself, the applicant, and her team are here to address any questions the commission may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whalen. Is there an applicant presentation as well, or are they just available for questions? Yeah. Awesome, great, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Twyla Souls, and I have been a corporate citizen of this community for the past 10 years. As the co-founder and CEO of Grouse Malt House, formerly Grouse Malting and Roasting Company. As Paul mentioned, Grouse is a manufacturing company. We transform locally grown grain into malt, which is used around the world. We ship coast to coast and internationally. We currently have 6 full-time employees and several part-time staff members. but I'm here before you this evening as the property owner and to discuss the well in Wellington. We have had a hard time putting a finger on exactly what the well in Wellington is, and the vernacular of this and the definition of it has changed over time. We do know that the well is a place for community. It's a place for community members, for Wellington, for Northern Colorado. This is a historic building. It has been standing for 101 years, and it begs to be put into use beyond what it's currently used for Grouse Malt House. We do not want anything else besides to be able to open up our doors to this iconic elevator to the community at certain times. We want to provide a focus on the arts with live music opportunities, to have a space where nonprofits could host a fundraising event, or a community member could have their 70th birthday party. The well does not currently fit into a box of a tap room or a brewery that's open with standard operating hours, primarily because the well's existence is not currently the focus of the property Grouse Malt House is. But we are excited to finally have a way to let the terroir of locally grown grain, malted by Grouse, to be tasted on this site by making a small amount of beer, in addition to offering other beverages and food. We do want to make some small necessary improvements to the site to be allowed the opportunity to get established, to generate income, and to provide economic benefit for the town via taxes and jobs, and to support the character of a growing Wellington. For several reasons, I am requesting that it be documented in this meeting minute notes that the well in Wellington, in short, the well, has been in existence since 2020. It has been discussed at the town level with the town staff and planning since 2021. And we have registered this as a trade name in the state of Colorado for a business that, and I quote, services beer, wine, spirits, and non-alcoholic beverages. And we are also pending federal trademark. This location is permitted by right to house a tap room and a brewery, as previously used in this capacity in the same space that we're asking to use for the well from 2016 to 2018. It is evident that there are leftover hostilities from the previous tenant, and recently comments have been made publicly against myself and the well that were quite derogatory and simply untrue. And there are two sides to this story, and I'm happy to clear up any confusion surrounding this that is relevant to this conversation. But I'd really like to focus on the future of this property. And that starts with this site plan review and the discussion that we're going to have this evening. I do wish that I would have come to you sooner to get your take on this, because we've been navigating the town, the changing land use code and requirements over the past 2 years. And I'd really like to have a discussion this evening to have a path to move forward for the well to open, and to hash out some of these requirements that the town has proposed for this site plan review.
Thank you, Ms. Souls. We'll call you back up to the podium if we have direct questions for you. We'll just kind of see how the discussion takes us. I also want to make note before we get started, this is not a referendum on your business or any of the doings. This is a site plan review. That's why we're here too. Board, any questions for staff or the applicant?
I don't have a question, but I just want to make it known that I did sit on the Board of Adjustments in May when the request for variance was made, just so you guys are aware.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, let's dive in.
Okay, so I have a few questions. My first question is in the for the requirements from the Board of Adjustments for the change in setback, it states the site plan shall provide significant buffering and screening along the eastern property lines to mitigate potential impacts to the existing residences and public rights of way. So when I'm looking at the landscape plan, I'm not really seeing a significant buffering. I see that we're meeting the minimum standards, and that isn't in the spirit of the what's variance that was given. So unless I'm looking at it wrong, to me, significant buffering isn't bushes. It's trees or maybe some kind of a fence line, since that's not an access point, something that provides what the Board of Adjustments asked for.
As you mentioned, we are meeting the town's requirements for the buffer. So that's the requirement that was set by the land use code, and we are meeting that requirement.
Respectfully, I understand that, but when you go in front of the Board of Adjustments and you are granted a variance, often there are specific requirements that are laid out for that variance. It's my job as a planning commissioner to make sure that those requirements are met. And I read to you the exact wording that was given when you were given that variance. So I'm asking, is that being met? And if it's not, how do you propose to meet that?
Can I speak to that too? I represented that case, or planning represented that case to the Board of Adjustments, and there was another criteria or a condition of approval from the Board of Adjustments, which was substantial compliance with the conceptual site plan presented to the Board of Adjustments. A very similar landscape plan was presented to the Board of Adjustment at that time. And so both of those things were evaluated by the Board of Adjustment in terms of comparing the landscape plan that was proposed that met the town's minimum requirements. I think the Board of Adjustments was, from my take, was primarily concerned with, they wanted to make sure that changes in the site plan process didn't eliminate landscaping that was presented to them that they understood would be included as part of the site development plan. That was staff's takeaway from those two conditions and how they related, was that the Board of Adjustments understood that right now there's zero landscaping. And so a net change provided landscaping. They didn't want to see that go away through a site development process.
Okay, but correct me if I'm wrong, that we require landscaping anyway.
Mhm.
We have robust landscape requirements in this town. So my question is, what is the difference between meeting the minimum standard and meeting the significant screening? And I don't know, maybe if you can lend some thought to that, Stephen, since you were there.
Real quick, because I also forgot, there was some discussion too about the fences for the patio areas, both east and west, in terms of providing some of that screening requirement. It wasn't limited to landscaping. The fence considerations was also a part of the Board of Adjustments consideration for screening.
Okay,
Thank
Yeah,
you.
the only thing I would add is that the role of the Board of Adjustments is to address the variance. So we are not planners, and we don't represent the interests of the Planning Commission. That's what this board is responsible for. And so I agree with Cody's characterization of the conversation that was conducted in May.
okay. I have more questions. You know, I have more questions.
Paul,
Very quickly, the species of the plant material, size, mature size and so forth can lend towards that dense hedge that could be created. So there's a combination of plant material that's being proposed on that edge of the property, including the trees and the understory as well, the shrubs and so forth. So with the species and the density of plants, we felt comfortable that there would be adequate screen in there, 3 to 4 foot size shrubs and so forth. So we felt that would be addressed the screening issue.
Okay, thank you.
okay, thank you, Paul.
I messed up my notes now.
I did put the, excuse me, I did put the landscape plan on the screen too, just to kind of enlarge that for reference, so you can see what was proposed. I know that the in the PowerPoint presentation, we added some color to it, which I think loses some of the the shrub plantings that were the screening. So this was in your packet also. I thought it just might be helpful for the conversation at the moment.
She was answered.
Can I bring up the question of parking?
Yeah.
Can we put this group back up the picture up there that shows where right now the asphalt or concrete is gonna go versus gravel and discuss that?
It was in my list, so thank you.
Parking, it's on everybody's list.
Just trying to determine why and how we are bypassing our rules.
I'm gonna navigate back to the right presentation here. Is this the image you were referring to, Commissioner McCaffrey?
Sort of, I can't really tell what's a concrete, what's gravel, how do you?
I think some of the site plan design is better.
You wanna
The
go-
actual site, the architecturals on the site, or not the architecturals, the site plan.
Okay, let me find that right picture and I'll pull it up.
The drainage plan, Cody, is page 29. That actually does a pretty decent job.
Okay.
It's got concrete and gravel depicted. And that actually might be more helpful, is to show why the gravel was proposed where it was proposed, to help mitigate some of that standing water issue with the impervious surfaces.
Page 29, you said?
Document page 29.
Yeah, because this, the current land use code on section 5.05.12 says surfaces for off-street parking will be either asphalt or concrete, and this is, and I understand the site, and I'm glad to see this, but I mean, does this require a variance? Is this an administrative change? What exactly? I've not seen this before, so I'm just curious how this gets resolved.
So what staff had suggested in the staff report was that the overall parking count using on-site, there's 26 parking spaces, and on-street for an additional couple of parking spaces brought the parking count up to 20 or 32 total proposed parking. Staff felt that the on-street parking was reasonable. Currently, the existing conditions, there's no defined driveway entrance here, which is kind of a traffic safety, not kind of, it is a traffic safety issue when you have that wide of a driveway opening. It's basically just a rollover curb for the whole frontage of that lot. So what we had asked the applicant to do early on was to clearly define the width of that driveway. And in so doing, it created the safety improvements for turning movements, but it also will help define more usable on-street parking here instead of leaving all that area open to drive entrance. So the total parking count of 32 satisfied the calculations for parking counts for the proposed site redevelopment and the existing structures. So the parking counts were satisfied. What the staff was trying to balance was the requirement in the design standards to pave on-site parking spaces with either asphalt or concrete, but also to satisfy the engineering design standard for stormwater storage and stormwater quality. And what we ran into was a situation where when you add more impervious surface via rooftops and parking, you increase the stormwater runoff, and therefore you have to store more, which takes up space also. And what staff was willing to consider was a balance of those two standards to accomplish the intent of both, to provide the parking spaces, but provide it in an alternative that would also accomplish stormwater drainage and stormwater quality. So if you read the fine details in the plan drawings, what this actually consists of, and this is a drainage basin map. There might be a better image, but I'll use this one since it's up. These, I think it's 10 parking spaces here on the very east side is what was proposed, and staff supported as being gravel to allow the stormwater from the site to drain to this point. I think they're just a little bit bigger. This is an 18-inch high perimeter curb, so it's higher than a typical 6-inch curb that you have just to kind of prevent people from driving over it. that 18-inch height is intended to actually store stormwater when it rains, and that would be the collection point. This structure right here, where my cursor is at, is the water quality control structure. So it's actually allowing the sediment and things to fall out of the stormwater before it reaches the flume and the street where it'll drain over time. So that was an out-of-the-box alternative solution that staff was willing to look at to accomplish both of those minimum criteria for parking spaces and stormwater quality.
So this part is gravel. This is concrete.
Concrete,
This is concrete.
correct.
As is that drive aisle.
The driveway is concrete.
Up here, concrete.
That was staff's recommendation, was that we felt that the intent of allowing gravel parking was for the stormwater quality benefits. Staff did not support gravel for the north area here. So our recommendation in the staff report was to pave these parking spaces and only allow the gravel where it was being used for stormwater detention and drainage. I will say that the current drainage calculations that engineering reviewed was based on the impervious surface, counting this area as gravel. So changing those to pavement will require changes to stormwater design to offset that additional impervious area. What staff had suggested in the staff report was possibly the balance, which will have to be calculated and verified by the engineers, but possibly reducing this paved area from, there's 7 parking spaces here currently, possibly reducing 2 parking spaces and some of this area for the turnaround and reverting this back to landscape area might help balance the stormwater requirement with the paving requirement and still be within the overall parking counts needed to meet the minimum parking count standards. That was a possible solution that we threw out. I don't think it's been vetted. I think the applicant was largely looking for guidance from the planning commission on what was going to be the requirement before they asked their engineer to redesign that and do that extra work to calculate a what if.
Was any consideration given to pavers?
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great.
Come on up. Do a quick introduction too, if you would.
Yeah, I'm Shane Ritchie. I'm with Ombre Civil Engineering, 118 Jackson, Fort Collins, Colorado. Do you need my phone number?
No.
Okay. So this is obviously a really unique site. First, I want to talk about the 2 things the site doesn't have. One, it doesn't have a subgrade storm drain infrastructure connection, which you would hope to have for pretty much any site, because that really helps you in the engineering designing for the stormwater drainage and conveyance and all that. The other thing it doesn't have is very much fall across the site. From the building to the street is like at most a couple feet. And in order to build a pond and not have it go into the building, you need grade or you need to dump it into something in the subgrade. So when you're adding concrete to the site, you're allowing the water to run off at a quicker rate and it's not infiltrating into the ground. And so to offset that, you have to detain the water. The goal for this was to provide water quality and detention for any new areas of imperviousness. And the current plan accomplishes that. The other challenge is that the site does not just all drain to First Street. It actually drains north and west and south. And so it's a really constrained site. The basin that goes to the north, we're trying to keep below the existing imperviousness for the gravel drives in there. So the original question was, were pavers considered? Typically with pavers, you would have a subgrade system to attenuate the water that gets into the subgrade off site, because if the water pools in the pavers, it's usually in like a sand filter or gravel layer, and it still needs to get moved out of that subgrade. Otherwise, basically it gets like sloshy in the subgrade and the surface material will start moving around. And if you've seen some of the permeable paver parking that was installed in Fort Collins due to their LID standards, just a couple year old sites can have a lot of movement based on that. So that was considered, but without the subgrade connection or more grade on the site to provide an outlet to that, it's just not a realistic possibility. What is being proposed for the gravel parking is sort of like a geomembrane that keeps the gravel in place, but it doesn't have a subgrade outfall.
That's the gravel pave too, right?
Yeah, or equivalent.
Yeah, that's on just, I didn't see that, excuse me, I didn't see that detail till right now, and it's similar to a detail, did some research, so this is gonna keep all this stuff locked together. It's not just gravel sitting there.
That's the intent.
Yeah. Cause I know Odell's tried to do their parking lot, I'm told, is probably not gonna fail because it fills up with those pavers, so.
Yeah.
But this, so if you turned on it, this is not just gravel. It's got this mesh on top and then it's compacted and that's over a gravel base, correct?
I guess the exact, the geotechnical recommendations will have to determine the final section for those recommendations, but that's what's being proposed and called out. So hopefully that helps.
Just out of curiosity with gravel, the gravel on the east side, since it's gravel and you can't mark those parking spaces, is there a good chance they lose parking spaces because people can't read or see or park straight?
I'm
Is that a
calling
big
out,
deal?
I'm calling out survey whiskers to be installed every 2 foot on center for the parking striping, which are like those little,
Survey
Yep.
whiskers?
they almost look like cush balls hanging out of the ground. Yeah, that,
Stake chasers.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
So-
another similar application you see is they'll use those, they're plastic, that are used to mark, like infield lines on a baseball field or base paths or where the base goes. It'll be the plastic hair plug that identifies the location.
Yeah, I
We
mean, I'm
did-
looking at a True Grid, which is a similar product to that, and they have the little markers that you stick in there and you can line it all out. So I was curious because I don't believe our code, land use code says concrete or asphalt, and I don't know if, and this is probably a side discussion, but does this need to be considered and added to our code at some point too? Because maybe this can solve some of those problems. I don't know how to evaluate that, but maybe that's a possibility.
So, and again, I'll kind of go back to what we had tried to present was this is a unique set of circumstances in trying to accomplish both the parking and the stormwater drainage, stormwater quality. So this was definitely a consideration that was given by staff that's outside of the normal standards. I don't know that it would be in the town's best interest to make a new standard for how to do a gravel parking lot with or without GeoGrid or some other reinforcement. It doesn't accomplish all of the same things that the town's code intends by using concrete or asphalt in terms of the longevity, the maintenance, weed control, dust control, other things. We really felt that this was an acceptable avenue for a limited site area, a limited use application for an existing site with constraints. So longer term, I don't know that it would be the right solution for a new or new site, maybe limited circumstances for redevelopment.
Can I ask another gravel question?
Yeah.
Well, it might not be a gravel question.
Sure.
Are the outdoor patios, are those going to be concrete or are they gravel?
Those are proposed as gravel.
And how do you propose somebody that's in a wheelchair will move around on gravel?
For the purposes of like movements for somebody in a wheelchair, gravel is an acceptable, it's not an ADA path like egress for the building. But the entire patio space does not need to be an ADA path. And so we're proposing concrete for all the ADA egress movements. I don't think there's any issue with it being gravel for the patio space. You can have the access board that governs, the ADA requirements, I think allows even for gravel trails as being accessible routes.
And I would go back to something that Mr. Ritchie said a moment ago. Not all areas of every site have to be ADA accessible. The standards for ADA, you have to satisfy accessible routes, meaning you can get from your parking space to the building entrance. The entrance has to be compatible, ramps, ADA bathrooms. You have to be able to provide services to a person with disabilities. And the outdoor patios would have to have ADA accessibility, but not the entire patio. So as long as some
On the
portion-
ramps, is there accessibility in the patio area?
Say that one more time.
Beyond the ramps to get into the patio area, is there accessibility?
I believe so, yes. The concrete pathways leading to the patio space are accessible.
But the patio itself is all gravel.
Yes.
There are patios that are concrete.
That's what I'm asking.
But not all of them are. So there is a patio that is proposed to be gravel.
It's just.
And
that
there are
west patio
patios.
That's
Yeah,
gravel. The
exactly.
remainders are concrete paved. That's what I read. Okay.
All right. I mean, my concern is that we're looking out for all of our citizens. I think that as a town, we should not meet the bare minimum, but make sure that we're doing things so that it works for everybody that wants to visit your restaurant or your bar, tavern, whatever it's gonna
The
be.
well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
This is the farmer in me. Are the scales going away?
No, the scales are staying.
Mm,
That's part of the concrete.
mm.
Yeah, I'm Zach. I'm doing a lot of design, kind of bring in the engineering, architect, client, all that stuff together. We did extensive redesign to make it as easy and accessible as possible with where handicap spots were, where the main entrance is, how to get into the building and how to access every portion of it. So we've put considerable consideration into
Okay.
that aspect of it. So it's all paved. You can get in, all that area coming off the street. It's paved. There's paved area. You can see there's a sidewalk. It's kind of tough to tell. Off the sidewalk, there's entry and we readjusted everything so that leads straight through the main entryway onto the paved patio and the old scale, which will still be there.
Thank you.
So
for
I
that.
just clarified that for you.
Thank you. I have one more comment on parking and I believe it's your, Twyla, I believe it's in your summary, your narrative. When you're talking about parking, there's a comment here about reducing the likelihood of a single large truck taking up many spaces. You want to be able to stripe the on-street parking as a way to limit commercial vehicle use of these on-street parking spots. I'm not okay with that. I mean, it's public parking, right? And so there's other businesses that operate up along there. And I think that we need to be cognizant of public use because it's not on your property. I understand the spirit of it, but I think that we need to allow for what if the development to your south or to your north requires a place for there to be a truck parking for deliveries. We don't want them blocking the whole street. We want them to be able to pull over, and yourself as well if you need delivery of something. So I just wouldn't be okay with that.
Well, I guess the intent there is that often there are commercial trucks that park there for days on end. So we would like to be able to restrict the parking to some degree so that the the on-street parking could be used by people that are visiting the well and not be tied up for days on end to park trucks and commercial vehicles.
I understand. Well, and it's 500 feet, am I right? From the property location for any off-street parking? Oh, this is, never mind, different zoning. Forget I said that.
With regards to striping within the right of way, and I put the site plan back up here again just for reference. again, one of the things that staff had asked the applicant to do from the beginning was to limit the width of the drive aisle to only what was necessary for the business purposes. Existing conditions, almost this entire site frontage is a rollover curb that could be used for access, and we wanted that confined to a specified width and location. The effect of that would make more of this site available for on-street parking. The applicant is certainly showing that here, that there could accommodate up to 6 additional parking spaces, whereas before there may have only been 1 or 2. This is a public road, so the town would have no intent of restricting it to where a truck or semi or something couldn't park. They may park over the lines designated, or Public Works and engineering may evaluate that the striping may not be the best interest of the town. We have to vet that process currently in terms of what the striping would be within the right of way. But the town wouldn't have any intention of purposefully restricting this to where a vehicle couldn't park there.
But with respect to the site plan, since that's a public road, that's not really even a consideration for us tonight, right?
Correct. And what the reason we had the applicant show that, and the reason we were discussing it, is our downtown areas and our parking provisions it does contemplate that in constrained sites like a downtown, it may not be feasible to meet all of the parking requirements on a site. Many of our downtown businesses have very limited on-site parking at all, and they rely on-street parking or shared parking areas for their patrons. So we were trying to balance the downtown parking with the on-street parking, and what we'd asked the applicant to do was demonstrate that you've maximized the amount of on-street parking availability for your site and still meet your business needs, and show us how much additional on-street parking would be possible if you eliminated the driveway or limited the driveway width to just what is necessary. So staff feels like the applicant has demonstrated the ability to meet the parking needs for their business as proposed.
Is there not an opportunity for overflow parking on the south end of this property? Or no?
No, the south end of the property are different lots, and that's not included in this site plan.
It's not included.
That's the intention, that truly we are really not redeveloping the site. We're trying to reuse it, to reopen a tap room that was already in existence. So the fact that we've been asked to go through this full site plan review in the first place is a little challenging. And also that we have been asked to add in, for example, this fire access through to the south of the building. It is, while I do get the spirit of it, it seems like it is burdensome for a small business to bring a site up when we are not building anything. We're not adding anything to this space that wasn't already there. So I needed to say that to this planning commission.
I understand the lots to the south aren't part of the site plan tonight, so I'm not going to get into detail. And I understand why you probably don't want overflow parking being so disconnected from the building. But is there a reason that the drainage can't be directed to the lots to the south, that in order to be able to completely pave and make impervious the entire parking lot? Looks like there's plenty of room down there.
Okay, so the first component is that furthest south is a separate lot and is anticipated to be redeveloped in the future as it's legally a separate lot. Tyler, you do own that lot. Yes, so. Yes, but originally we actually did start with the same thinking that you have of, well, that's where the water's going. One of the challenges is that the water that is going south, in order to treat the water that is coming from the north, you'd have to capture all of the water coming off of the road, bring it in sight, and then dump it back off of site. And without any subgrade infrastructure, And with very low slopes on the existing curb and gutter, that's almost impossible, but it's also very burdensome to that south lot if it were to ever redevelop. So the goal was to treat the detention on the north side on site, not utilizing the off-site lot that is owned by the client. And if the southern site were to redevelop, it would require an additional pond. It would have to be reconfigured. But bringing that water and treating not just our site's water, but also all of the water coming down that curb and gutter, bringing it into the site, treating it and getting it back out wasn't a feasible solution for the fairly minimal parking improvements that are being proposed. And so that's why a creative solution that's still providing water quality for the site is being proposed on the north without impacting an off-site pond or off-site improvement. If that makes sense.
Does, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Good clarification. Thank you.
I have a quick question on those spots that are then deemed gravel parking spots, but also to hold excessive water. I don't want to say retainage pond, but that we're going to get a storm like we've had last week, then you just lost 10, 12 parking spots potentially, because you're sharing, okay, we can park there if there's not water in it. But if
Yes,
there's water in it, then we have a mess. And I'm kind of looking at even Ridley's parking lot. They have these gravel medians and it's just terrible because all the gravel just slurps over into the parking lot. So are we gonna just get a rainfall and then all of the gravel just comes out into the parking lot? And are we gonna have just a full pond for days, maybe?
so a couple things there. The volume that is being proposed in the parking lot is not huge. But that is part of the staff's agreement and justification for those east parking stalls being gravel is to allow for infiltration if there's a stormwater event that fills up the couple parking stalls. It's not uncommon to provide detention in a parking stall. Most municipalities allow up to a foot. But with it being gravel, it'll infiltrate at a quicker rate and it's better for the water quality and low impact development of the site. In this instance, yes, there for a couple parking stalls, there will be some water in the parking lot, but that's the trade-off for the detention, meeting the LID component of the site, meeting the water quality. And what's nice about the configuration of the site is there's actually a lot of areas, the existing building, the scale, the concrete in front of the building, all of that will drain to this water quality infrastructure and provide water quality for existing infrastructure that's going undetained, untreated in its current configuration. So it's actually a pretty good solution for capturing and conveying that water.
So another question is, are we saying that it's not possible to pave that at all? So it can't be paved?
One of the considerations for paving it is that the water that will sit there will be sitting on pavement or concrete, and pavement and concrete are not as well suited for having ponding as the gravel would be, because the gravel has the ability to infiltrate the water. So that's one of
You're saying it's impossible to concrete or pave that.
it's not impossible, no.
Well, and if you pave all of that, then there's,
Microphone, please. Thanks.
if they were to pave the entire lot today, tomorrow, then you're gonna get exponentially more water flowing into people's, like, down the street away from the property, which is what you don't want. So if you look at one of those images up there showed terrain lines, and that those north gravel lots and the east gravel lots are lower than the pavement and the patio. So your water is gonna be draining into those gravel spots, which is it's a huge improvement of what it is now. So whatever is happening now, it's not going to be worse than that.
Do you know what the split on that is roughly? Percentage of the lot, what flows north and what flows east?
You can look at that one map. I don't know what the split is, but if you look at that, you can see that from the patio, that terrain line is kind of where the patio and the scale is now. And it flows to the east and to the south and to the north. So if you paved it all, then you're giving water problems to everyone else around you, which is not what you want in a new development. You know, if you're trying to make improvements, that would be not an improvement.
And there's not an opportunity to change the grading.
We can't, I mean, you're lower the property next to you, you know, like it would be, if you make this property higher, then that is worse for everyone else. It is an extremely flat area right there, which is why there's train tracks there. Train tracks go through flat areas. So, I mean, you're looking at a really flat, that whole street there is very flat. So you just don't have any way to improve it. Besides, I mean, I think what has been offered is a drastic improvement to what is there currently. So, yeah, and you can see the terrain, the grade line that goes around. You've got arrows there showing where drainage is going to go. So you know, this is a major improvement over what is there now and what has been there for the last 100 years. So I think that's something to kind of zoom out and look at, like you're making his best case of what is doable.
I also think that if you look at that detail on page 27, this is not, there is a mesh, a plastic mesh that has little circles in it. And I actually sent you the link to, if you're at your emails there, to the company. So I thought it was just, it's not just gravel. There's a gravel base.
We've explored many different options.
But it's not just gravel. There's a mesh on top and that's the final layer and that's what people drive on. So
I believe so.
yeah, it's in
Yeah.
the detail right here.
Yeah, but is that not the system that we were discussing in Fort Collins, that if you accumulate standing water on those paver systems, it'll destroy it? That's a different system.
Those are actual like brick.
Individual, yeah, the semi-permeous ones, yeah.
Those are actual brick pavers. This is
Yeah.
gravel with like basically a plastic membrane.
Okay. So standing water will not impact these the way they do the individual paver system with the shifting and the heaving.
It's not that it's there's still maintenance because it'll be gravel parking, but it's not as substantial of infrastructure as the like concrete pavers.
This is more permeable.
Yeah,
Much more.
and this comes in a roll. It's like a giant plastic roll that rolls out, and they can handle semi-truck traffic, so they're very heavy duty.
Cody, you mentioned staff does not support the gravel parking to the north. The alternative, if that were to go concrete, is that grade able to change to where now the entire lot slopes into the 10 gravel spaces to the east? And is it possible that a gravel system there will contain the rest of the lot if it's all concrete?
I think one of the bigger issues for that type of a question is that the drainage calculations are really tight based on what was proposed. So any changes to the amount of pervious area or impervious area is going to have to be revetted by both the design engineer and the town engineering department to verify that the changes still work from a drainage standpoint. That's not something that we're able to speak to tonight off the fly. What I think could be helpful is if the planning commission is looking at the minimum standards for the parking requirement, if the gravel as proposed on the current site plan drawings presented isn't acceptable, we would need some guidance as to what the planning commission would be looking for in terms of meeting the paving requirements. And then we'd have to work with the applicant to address the design and engineering standards to make sure that those elements are satisfied as well.
I think personally, I would prefer to see the north sections paved. But if that negates the collection system on the east to the point where it's not feasible anymore, I can live without it. If you have to have one to have the other, then it makes sense. But If the gravel is just a cost savings measure on the north, I would prefer to see it concrete.
The other thing to consider is that we have begun to look at what it would, how it would impact the drainage calculations to pave those north spots. And what would most likely be required is that we would bring the parking down to the minimum requirement. So right now we're providing an additional 2 parking spots than what is required. And we would really like to provide as much parking as possible on site, which is a consideration to have for allowing the gravel parking to the north.
I was gonna say, I mean, I think the applicant is correct in that this is certainly with the product, the gravel pave too, and what I've looked at. It is an improvement. It does not, in fact, meet the strict application of our land use code, but I would be supportive of both those areas having that product on it, because I think it will lock it down, and it should. I mean, based on what I've looked at. So at this point, you got to do something. And I don't know how you could do it on this parcel alone.
Weird question. And maybe you'll remember the answer to this question. Why as a town do we require the parking lots to be paved? I'm sure it wasn't just because it sounded good.
Yeah, I'll answer that. And then if others wanted to chime in too. But the short answer is there's a lot of benefits that paving with asphalt or concrete provides that dirt does not. Mud that gets tracked out onto our streets and ground into the asphalt pavement, rocks that collect on your muddy tires and then leaves gravel on the asphalt paved roads, gets driven over, and that gravel gets ground into the asphalt. When mud dries on asphalt surface and then it gets chipped off or peeled off, it draws the oils out of the asphalt with that mud. I don't have it here, but I have one of my former coworkers in a previous community actually has a piece of mud that pulled an entire layer of asphalt off with it when it got chipped off on a construction site. You've got dust control, weed control, all those factors that lead to the standards that the town has adopted to provide public health and safety, dust control for neighbors. All those factors are contemplated in that requirement for paved parking. So I said it'd be short, but that was kind of a long-winded explanation. And there's other benefits as well, defining the parking spaces very clearly, meeting ADA requirements where necessary. There's a litany of other things that get rolled into that requirement, and asphalt paving and concrete paving has long been identified as the preferred solution to address all of those types of concerns.
And the other thing is a paved area is probably 50% more efficient at parking. If you go to the T-bar lot, they're down there.
That's a
T-bar's the short
disaster.
answer.
Yeah, they park whateverly down there. So
So then I would be inclined to say that aside from the east parking lot, I would prefer that the north is paved. If one or two, what you were saying, that alternative, 1 or 2 of those spaces needs to be given up to gravel in the north area, what you were with the landscaping and stuff, I would be okay with that. My concern is many of those things and the cost effectiveness of not destroying the roads we have right now any more than they're already getting destroyed. Not having gravel tracked out into the street. I mean, my hope would be that those things work. I've never seen them in action, so I have no idea. And then I view it as a mobility issue. I just, like, anybody that knows me that knows I limp around a whole bunch. I need a steady surface to walk on. And I'm younger than some of the people in our town that I would hope would choose to have a 70th birthday party at your facility. So in my balancing of all of that, whatever on this particular issue, whatever is necessary to meet the drainage requirements and maximize paved parking is my inclination. But to that end, I have a question. You included this parking table. So am I to understand that 6,332 square feet of your space will be the well?
Well, that includes the outside patio, I believe.
Okay. No, I mean, I'm just wanted to make sure that the math was correct. Okay, well, that's my thoughts on the parking at least.
There are other things to site plans. Anybody else want to jump into other topics? I know that's always the big one. That's always the big one. Lighting, how's their lighting?
Yeah.
Well, I had a question on page 6. It says it's a special event community center. Is this, so you talked about serving beer, wine, spirits, non-alcoholic beverages, food. I mean, is it an event center, special event center?
Again, it is tricky to nail down what this is. I do think it is more of a tap room, although it does not have it has non-traditional hours of operation. We're not going to be open from 4 to 9 every day, because Grouse is in operation there 7 days a week, 24/7. We intend to, at least while Grouse is in existence there, we would only open our tap room doors, open the space for certain events. I don't believe that classifies it as an event center, but because it is more of a tap room that is only open for special occasions.
Thank you.
In your narrative, you mentioned about Grouse relocating. Is it your intention to relocate it to the lot adjacent to it?
No, my intention is to relocate it elsewhere to agricultural land where it would most likely be better suited.
Okay.
Mhm.
Any other questions? And I'll apologize. You two gentlemen in the front row, I told you to sign in for public comment and we skipped right over it. So if you fellows would like to come up and say anything, this would probably be a good time. Go ahead. Yeah. Totally my fault. I apologize.
My name is Jacob Waterman. I'm a resident here in Wellington. I just have a few things to say. As a resident, I fully support new businesses here in Wellington, and I feel that the well will accommodate the local economy and bring more money and opportunity for jobs into it as the business grows. It will draw people from outside Wellington as well as locals to a unique location to enjoy locally brewed beer and the opportunity to buy ingredients for brewing beer. It will encourage a variety of diverse food services as well as being in Northern Colorado bands and musical talent to perform at the business. And then there are a few breweries in Wellington, and I feel this will draw beer connoisseurs from all over to a new business, experience a great atmosphere, and enjoy their products. I'm more than happy to support the well and all it has to offer. Thank you.
Thank you. You're free to come up if you'd like. That's okay. All right, awesome. Thank you again. I apologize for the kind of mixing around. Did you sign in? Well.
Not her first rodeo.
Yeah, exactly. I'll sign in afterwards.
Thank you.
Melissa Whitehouse, 3922 Grant Avenue. I really only had just a few questions about page 24, the actual site plan itself. And the fact that the rendering does not include 3/5 of the entire site. And we are talking about a site plan review, which means I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, the entire site, not just the north end of it. The gravel patio, that does sound like that's an entertainment only venue, but there's nothing in the rendering at all about the gravel patio. It's the biggest feature of this entire site. And there's really just a fence around it. So I really don't know what's going on over there. And since we don't know what direction the possible performance stage is going to face, is it going to face south, east, or west? There's livestock to the west. There's residential directly to the east. So unless it faces directly south or directly north, I think there's going to be some sound issues there. Looking at the wood patio on the west side, 33-foot patio, there's not a patio there now, as far as I know. And I can't see the setbacks on that. I think it's 4-foot setback, 5-foot setback maybe from the BNSF right of way. Not a good idea considering that we might have passenger rail service at some point in time in the future. The other issues that I ran into, I'm looking at the green bins, there's no size or shape. There's usually at least an identifier. Granted, it's not within the rendering. There's a couple of brief photos about what that is. Size and shape is not there at all. Don't know what those other buildings are. It says AC unit, and I think that's referenced as a west gravel patio, or is that the gravel patio in the northwest corner? Because you would require, or some of the parking needed or listed for gravel patio, I'm not sure which one it's looking at, because in the documentation, it mentions a gravel patio that the HVAC unit sits on. I'm assuming that's the one that's south of the wood patio. I just don't know. That additional building next to that, between the two, don't even know what that is. The other issues that I ran into, actually, I would call it hardscaping of that east side of the parking lot. Because the house on McKinley, all windows face that parking lot. And it is true that before, there were actually fewer people parking in that parking lot, almost never parked there facing east, so it was never an issue. It sounds like this is going to be a much larger venue. I think I would really prefer, well, maybe the resident would prefer, maybe they don't care, that you actually have at least a 3-foot hardscape fence there, not just shrubs, but again, there's a lot of diesel trucks and we're trying to mitigate some of the noise. And that was really the only considerations that I thought of. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Cody or Twyla, any comments on any of those? I'm kind of curious about the screening on the east. There is an 18-inch curb there, correct? That's where there's an 18-inch curb. So any landscaping is going to start 18 inches above the parking grade already. That doesn't knock out all the headlights, but it does a pretty
Yeah,
decent
but
job.
it's on an incline, so
Right.
it's not all 18 inches. And again, we do have the plan to meet the 30 inches of hedging.
Okay.
So.
Tell me a little bit more about the food service you're gonna offer.
The plan initially is to only offer prepackaged food or to bring in a caterer that already has prepared food and to serve it on site.
So no food trucks.
If we do food trucks, we understand that there's additional permitting required.
I was more concerned with where would they go on your site in the parking lot, restricting your parking, or
There is a spot already carved out that's not for parking that we anticipate putting a food truck. So it's, could show you if you wanted to put the site plan back up.
So she did bring up one good, where would the musician go if they're on his drawing?
I thought that there was a rendering that had the stage and it was facing southeast behind the fenced area.
And that correct is in that northern gravel patio, the northwest corner, correct? Okay,
Mhm,
thank you.
mhm, mhm. So, I wish I had a pointer, but
Go ahead.
so this space where we would put a food truck. Not in proposed parking. What's that? And it would be fully fenced in.
So
I
I
just
do
have
have
one
some
more-
Oh, go ahead. I was going to ask some questions about lighting, but do you? Are you ready? Okay.
go.
So I am actually trying to find where it is showing where lighting is going, because I know it is a pretty dark lot in there. And is there electricity that has to be pulled to get, by the sidewalk? And is there enough street parking or street lighting?
Unfortunately, our architect wasn't able to make it, but I do know that our lighting plan meets town code and that it is solar powered lighting.
is that in this?
Was there a photo, what page is the photo?
I don't see one. Yeah, I didn't get that.
Mr. Whalen, could you speak to what you reviewed for the site lighting?
Oh, gosh. I do recall looking at a photometric plan, I believe in one of the initial reviews. I can't recall all the exact details, but as far as photometrics, illuminance and so forth at the property lines and under the lights and so forth did comply with the town code and that was, once it complied, there's no further use and asking for modifications, revisions, so what, we had that item checked off our list, but it did comply with our photometric requirements for as I recall, I believe it was 1 foot, 0.1 foot candles approximately 20 feet beyond the property line. But it did comply at that point and we pursued it no further. Because that was one of the items to check off our list of plans to have completed.
So it sounds like in the staff review that was reviewed, it didn't generate any comments necessitating changes, and we probably forgot to go back from and pull the earlier submittal and put it in with the current plan set. My suggestion could be that we do have minimum and maximum illumination levels defined in our code standards. The revised plan sets need to have all of the plan sheets completely intact. If the commission is agreeable, staff can administratively verify that the revised photometric plan does satisfy all minimum maximum requirements of our land use code. So I think some head nodding.
Blinding the neighbors.
Well, I don't think your house is close enough for us to get a
Not mine.
spotlight there, but if that's agreeable, we could handle that administratively, and I saw some head nods for that.
Cody, I have a couple of questions for you. One, the signage will be a separate permit.
Correct. All signs have to comply with our sign code, which is defined in terms of size, location, materials, and attachments and things of that nature. So typically where a sign is not available at the time of site plan, for full details, we do an administrative review on those with a permit for that sign.
Okay, because I know in the narrative, it was expressed that there'd be a sign on the east side. Is that on the east side of the grain bin? Because in the rendering, it's on the north side, I think. I think I'm looking at it with the right direction. So that's fine if that's separate. And then not kind of part of this, but kind of not. So based on the description that was given by the applicant for the proposed use, and it had been mentioned that the bathrooms would be upgraded to be ADA. Will there be a requirement based on this event use that there's a minimum number of bathrooms available? Because if it's one bathroom, that's not enough, or two, based on the square footage proposed to be in use for the well.
No, we are not proposing any internal changes because the inside property is already brought up to standards. And so the occupancy of the entire space inside outside is limited to 149, which is allowable for the 2 bathrooms that are both ADA compliant.
Okay.
And thanks, Ms. Souls. That was one of the questions that town staff had asked early on too, was with patio spaces and events and other things that may be conducted on site, to consider the overall plumbing fixture count to accommodate inside and outside uses. There's a draft architectural code analysis in the packet, and that was contemplated. Our building official has looked at that and said that the proposed plumbing fixture requirements does satisfy the plumbing code for number of bathrooms and ADA accessibility for the existing. So what the applicant is suggesting based on existing conditions and the current proposal, that would be satisfied. If something changes in the future, it'd have to be addressed through a building permit to address the additional occupants for restroom facilities.
So the 149 person occupancy is that based on what's available plumbing wise? Because it would seem to me at 6,300 square feet, occupancy would be significantly higher normally. for this proposed use.
So the occupant load of the building is different than the occupant load of the proposed.
Right,
site.
I understand. My concern is the 149 person occupancy is clearly not set for just the interior of the building. If the tap room is 600 square feet, or if I remember correctly. So that occupancy load is taking into consideration the outdoor use.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
so that's a maximum set based on the limitations of what the building can accommodate.
Correct. The bathroom counts limit the occupancy of the total space to 149 occupants.
And you're committed to making sure that you don't exceed that.
That's correct.
And further, from a design standpoint, the occupant load has calculations for square footage for different types of spaces. So kitchens or tap rooms or warehouses have different calculation methods than assembly areas. So that is why town staff required the architectural code analysis, was verification that the design of the building and the outdoor spaces meet the minimum code requirements for plumbing fixture counts. So based on what's being presented, that is satisfied, and town staff is supporting the code analysis. We do need to have a stamped set for record. Unstamped architectural code analysis really has no value. So that was a condition of a recommended condition of the staff report, was to get the stamp.
I understand. I guess I just wanted to clarify because it's being reviewed as a tap room use, but is being presented as a bigger use, right? And so I'm just trying to verify that everything's going to be in compliance. Everything is going to be at the standards set by the town of Wellington for health, safety, enjoyment, whatever.
What's being presented in the packet that was included in the staff report satisfies design requirements for the proposed indoor and outdoor spaces. We haven't asked for more than that. I think it would be worthy of consideration for the applicant if you're anticipating a special event that it would exceed that occupancy or the occupant load. You may need to provide portalets or some other alternative for a special event that would require submission for review and approval for a special event on a case-by-case basis. Does that help alleviate some of the concern?
I think so. I guess, so it's being presented for indoor outdoor use as a tap room, right? Like that's the zone or the use within this zone is a tap room. That's what the setbacks were adjusted for, all of those things. The applicant is saying that it will only be open for special events, which conceivably, if you're having an outdoor music venue, my expectation is that you could have more than 149 people show up for that music.
The site won't accommodate a lot of people. It's not a big site.
Well, the proposed square footage is 6,332 square feet.
We just heard.
That's pretty big.
I guess I don't understand the concern because we just heard that it satisfies the requirement. So the existing restrooms that are available satisfy. So I guess we're just worried about hypotheticals at this point.
Well, I hadn't finished asking my question. So if you were to have an event where you were saying like with the portlets and stuff like that, is every event going to require a special permit, or are the events permitted use based on the proposed use and site plan that is before us?
If we were to have an event that we wanted to have more than 149 people, we understand that we would need to go through the special permitting application and provide additional toilets if we were granted the approval of that special permit.
And I think one of the considerations that you may be getting at, well, let me take a step back. If, to your point, if a special event were proposed that was a large audience, large assembly, that would require a special event approval under the town's normal requirements. Many of our businesses in town host events where they invite people to use their facilities. My HOA has had meetings at Sparge Brewing, and they didn't need a special event for that. It was contemplated within their capacity, but the chairs are fixed. The restroom facilities are fixed. It's designed and intended for assembly uses. So the T-Bar hosts events. The town has used the T-Bar for recognition events for volunteers. So the concept of using an existing business and facility for an event is not unheard of in the town, and that's common everywhere. If you're anticipating an event larger than your normal daily operations, like if you're hosting a 5K run and you're going to have a large number of people there that wasn't part of your normal business operations, that would require a special event permit.
Okay.
Here's where I think the confusion is coming for me. It's presented as a tap room, but it's not going to be open except for special events. So I guess I'm a little gray on what's actually being presented. And then also, I would love in the future to have the lighting plan, and if there's a stage, that included as well. I mean, that point that was raised was a very fair one. If we've already taken the variance down from the neighborhood, the Board of Adjustments has already made that variance, then there are these other factors that really affect the neighborhood and the surrounding areas that I would really appreciate seeing in order to make an informed decision. But for me, I get what Lisa's saying, in that, you know, we're hearing from the public about a tap room and, you know, this, but then the applicant is saying it's not going to be open normal business hours and it's only going to be for special events. So it's a very conflicting message that we're getting, and I'm not sure exactly what it is we're approving or not approving.
Like I did try to address when I first spoke to the planning commission this evening, is that we don't fit into a box right now. So yeah, we're not planning on being open for normal operating hours, but we do intend to sell tickets to a music event. We're having live music. We're going to sell 125 tickets to let people come see Cloud Cult, you know, a band that will definitely sell out. So I guess that's, but the truth of the matter is we need to be a tap room so that we can get approved for our liquor license, because ultimately it hinges upon being able to brew a small amount of beer made with the malt that we produce on site, so that we can give that to the community. So it does truly fall under a tap room that is only open for certain hours, not routine operating hours. Because if you were to just call it an event space, then that would mean that we wouldn't necessarily be required to have a liquor license, and that is the crux of the matter here.
I'm interested in moving towards a vote here. I just have one question, and this is for Cody. On your recommendation for approval, you've got a line in here, subject to conditions 1 to 5 as identified in the staff report. Number 2, on your conditions, revise the site plans to include paved parking north of the driveway. So if someone were to recommend and second, and the motion passes, that this is approved pending your conditions 1 to 5, does that require the applicant then to resubmit concrete for the north end, although our conversation here is kind of led in a different direction for that piece of the site plan?
What I heard, I feel like staff needs some clarification on what the intent of the commission is, because there was certainly a lot of conversation around whether or not the paved parking was required or not, and what type of path forward would it be, because the applicant and their engineers are going to have to balance the impervious stormwater calculations depending on the scenario that the planning commission would recommend. So we as staff could use some guidance on, is it pave all of the 7 parking spaces as shown on the site plan? Is it allow reduction of the paved or the parking spaces to meet the stormwater calculations, or some combination thereof? Or is the gravel going to be allowed? I guess I could use a kind of a headline on what the direction of the commission would be, and then we can help craft the conditions to meet that intent.
From my perspective, I think it goes back to a comment you made earlier, which is that we have a unique structure and a unique site. And we have an opportunity for that to be developed in a way that brings value to the community. So it's the round peg, square hole, square peg, round hole, right? And so I think that the intent of the code, I feel like the site plan satisfies the intent of the code. And I don't know that the expectation should be or is that it's letter of the law, black and white, and it either is a yes or a no on every little thing that happens that gets presented to this body. So from my perspective, I think that there's an opportunity for us to, move forward with the site plan as it has been presented, and given the recommendations that the staff has made, I'm satisfied with what I've seen. That it's about finding that right balance between public interest, safety, development, all the goals that the town and that the commission has. So from the parking and the gravel and the drainage, what I heard tonight from the additional comments, I think satisfies what the intent is, given the unique nature of this property. That's just my perspective on it.
I guess I would like to see just maximum paving. Any reduction in gravel, I think, is beneficial for the site, for the town, for the stormwater. If those calculations haven't been run, how burdensome is it to run the wastewater or the stormwater calculations starting to tick away at those north spaces? Does one make a difference? Does it not break even till 5? Can they accommodate paving the entire thing and still be able to run stormwater into the east lots? I would like to see those calculations. I'd be curious to know what they land on, just for reduction in gravel purposes. I'm not a fan of the gravel on the north side. The east, I totally understand. That makes sense. Doubling it up as a storm basin, I'm satisfied with that.
Okay. Mr. Ritchie, do you have any order of magnitude on balancing the stormwater and the paving?
Yeah, so the difference in percent imperviousness from gravel to concrete or asphalt is almost double. But the difference, it's the same difference between that and open space. Like open space is 2%, gravel is like 45, concrete's 90, maybe 100. I can't remember specifically which one. So basically it's 50%. So if you have 7 gravel parking stalls, you make half of that open space, half of that concrete, you're losing half of your parking, approximately.
What does that do to the stormwater calculations that then, if they do pave them, the idea would be to change grades so that that pavement runs to the east side?
So one of the things that we're not gonna do tonight is re-engineer the site.
Okay.
We need some direction from the commission on whether or not you're going to require the paved parking requirement as written in our standards, or allow some modification. The engineering, Mr. Ritchie is the design engineer, will have to balance the direction of the planning commission with the stormwater drainage calculations, and that will have to be verified by our town engineering, that it meets the town's acceptableness from an engineering design standpoint.
It's kind of,
I'm like
chicken and egg.
I'm like Chairman Sarter. I would like to see all those paved on the north side, and then I would be happy.
Not at the expense of saying now there is so much water that the east parking spaces can no longer handle it and it explodes the entire plan. I don't want to do that.
That's where, but how do we do that without getting an engineering? Now, do we move it till next month?
Chicken and egg, that's where I'm at.
So
I mean-
can we just get a quick, we've heard from a couple folks, pardon me, didn't poke you.
You're fine.
You've made your, can we see if we can figure out if we have a consensus to give guidance as to what we might be voting on tonight?
Just make one final point. So what I'm hearing still is event space, entertainment, and entertainment facility is not a permitted use in this zone. Tap room is. So what I'm hearing is that if you would like to have a business established and it doesn't meet the zoning, you say it's something else to be approved, and then it's like a bait and switch. In my opinion, not exactly, because you're being very forthcoming with it, However, when I'm looking at the code and listening to what this is going to be, I can't in good faith put it forward as is because I don't have a complete plan and I still am not clear on the actual intended use of the space.
It's zoned in light industrial.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, well, and I'm kind of trying to put my heads around, you're coming for a site plan for a what? So to get the liquor license, and that could be challenging. I'm not really sure the answer to this, but if you're doing a brewery or a brewery, do you have to provide hours for getting a liquor license, or can you say, I just want a liquor license just because I might serve beer?
The liquor license that we're getting is actually a brew pub liquor license, which would permit us to make beer on site and serve other alcoholic beverages, wine, other beer, spirits,
Even the full liquor license.
brew pub liquor license. But those are definitely, truly separate from the site plan development and the liquor board, which is, a state run. But I did want to provide that background with the type of liquor license that we're going for.
You do not have to submit hours of operation for that license.
Correct.
You do not. Okay.
The parking lot thing, I just want maximum paved, whatever makes the most sense without floating out the whole east side of the parking lot. But with that said, I'm inclined to agree with Commissioner Moyer. Back to what I said before, I was unclear on what you were saying you were going to use it for versus what it was presented as a use. And I think that's important. So I think that needs to be hashed out. What your intended use is, so that the use and your intention are the same. Because what you're saying to me is that you're doing only open for special events. You're presenting a site plan that's for outdoor use for special events, music venue, all of that. And none of that fits into this land use code. A tap room already exists in your building, as you've said, from a previous tenant. Therefore, you don't need a site plan review for a tap room.
I'm just questioning why we're being asked to bring the entire site up to code when we're not developing the site. We're not building anything. I truly, in reviewing past planning commission, things that have been brought in front of the planning commission, I'm just really struggling to understand why we have been put through this rigmarole. An example that just came before you last month was our neighbors to the north. 8141 First Street was allowed to change their zoning without any scrutiny, without bringing any of their entire site up to code. So I guess I just, I don't really want to, I know it doesn't behoove me to necessarily compare.
So I would speak to that, is that actually that was a lot of rigmarole, and we zoned that building what it's intended to be zoned, which is downtown commercial.
Mhm.
So in fact, we followed the land use code in that zoning.
With
isn't-
improved parking and landscaping and then taking into consideration the lighting and.
If they were
And-
to open a new business within that, then their site plans would have to comply with the new code, the same as we're asking of you. It's a new business. It's a new use. It's a new plan.
With site and plan improvements such as an outdoor patio for your intended use of special events.
Cody, can you clarify the special event? Because the occupancy and maybe it's wordplay. Special events are their hours of operation could be Friday from 7 to 10 once a month. And they have 149 people. That's not a special event, because they're a brew pub serving beer to an occupancy, which they're permitted to do. So are we just getting caught up on the wording of special event, where it's not really anything that needs a permit?
And that's, it's an interesting question because the way staff has looked at it was the bar or tavern use is the use that's proposed on site. If a bar or tavern happens to have live music outside, we've had that at other bars and taverns in the town. That is not the use of the site from a town planning perspective in terms of our land use code. We looked at what's the principal use of the site, which is a bar or tavern adjacent to an existing light industrial use. We don't have a definition for what the applicant is describing. So town staff looked at a bar or tavern that may happen to also have these other events at their facility. We didn't view that as a different use. We viewed it as the bar or tavern that happens to host events for special occasions.
Would not trigger a special event permit unless they exceed their occupancy.
That's the way staff looks at it. Yeah, that,
Right.
A live music event wouldn't be out of the ordinary for a bar or tavern to host live music on a patio. We viewed that as reasonable under the bar or tavern use. My recollection from the Board of Adjustment meeting in consideration of the variance was that was also contemplated. I think the Board of Adjustments had a pretty lengthy conversation of determining the appropriateness of the variance as to whether or not amplified music would be allowed or not allowed. And ultimately the decision was made to not define that, because then you have to get into a whole new set of standards for what does that mean? What's the volume? How far away? Is it directional? All those questions come into play. But the Board of Adjustments did contemplate the outdoor music at the patio as part of the use for the bar or tavern and considering the reduction of the setback. So that's some perspective on the different ways it's been looked at by staff and from the Board of Adjustments. I don't know that it's going to be possible to answer every question or every scenario, but that's what we've looked at to date.
So I would be inclined to say that it's subsequently being used as a bar tavern based on the applicant's own narrative of saying initially the well will be open for special events. So that indicates to me that that's the primary use that happens to be a bar tavern, which required a variance because of its location close to residential. A special events for things like fundraisers, team building, weddings, or general parties, outdoor music by her own testimony here tonight. That to me is the primary use. And that is not zoning for bar tavern. That is a different kind of use. So at best, I would want some clarification and justification that probably couldn't be permitted tonight. In addition to the parking lot questions, I would like to have an opportunity to see about the significant screening. I just have a lot of questions. So my proposal would actually be to table it till these questions can be answered. Otherwise, I would be inclined to say no. That's where I stand right now.
I think we should just zoom out a little bit. Staffing is hard. Running a business full-time when you're already running a successful business is extra difficult. What Twyla doesn't want to have right now is a full-time operating business. Could that come down the road with regular hours? Sure. But right now, this is a tap room that she can open when there's a fundraiser, when somebody wants to have their 70th birthday party, when they're saying, hey, we've got this beer that Odell used our malt in, and we're gonna be open we have an event made from 4 to 9, come and have this beer that is highlighting local breweries using their malt. So it is the round peg and the square hole, because this isn't a full-time operating business. And Twyla and I had this conversation a lot. What I told her is just say you're going to be open and then just not open, because that would be so much easier at this meeting. If she just came up here and lied and said, I'm going to be open from 4 to 9 every night, you guys would be like, okay, great, it's a bar and tavern. But that's not what she's going to do. And she didn't feel comfortable just saying she was going to do that, because that would have been so much easier. So it's not a special event space. It is a bar because it is her business that she owns. and she's gonna open it when she wants to, because there is something that she wants to host there. Whether it's a tapping of a new beer, or a fundraiser for some local event, or somebody's birthday party. It's not a advertised, hey, everybody come rent this space. That's not what it is. And I know that's hard to, that's tough because it doesn't fit in any one spot. And I myself I struggled with that, but I own a business. I've had employees. My wife runs a restaurant group in Fort Collins. Staffing and having a business operating full time is extremely difficult. I don't think anybody would argue that. And what she does not have time to do is worry about that all right now. She wants to have a business that can operate parallel with the business that is paying the bills, which is Grouse Malt House. So this seems ridiculous that this is the only way that she was able to just have a tap room to brew some beer that she wants to have people come and drink sometimes. But this is the way it works to get to that point. So I hope that clarifies it a little bit. Did anybody else have, questions directly related to that? Did that clarify anything for you?
I appreciate what you're saying.
Yeah.
Here's my struggle.
Okay.
As a former restaurant owner, I get it, right? But that isn't the hat that I wear right now. And if you've paid attention to any planning commission meetings, maybe this year, our hat's been real heavy. And it's really important that we abide by the guidelines that were set down, not by us. We're appointed and entrusted to apply the land use code and the comprehensive plan and the ordinances and all of the requirements as we've been entrusted to do. And we have a little gray area, and which is why I offered to be willing to table this issue till there's some better clarification. Because based on the use, and as someone who's gotten a liquor license, that is not an easy thing to do, but it's a lot easier to do in Wellington than Fort Collins. I understand the effort. I need clarification. I need something that demonstrates what this use is, because it's presented as a special event thing. There's a narrative about how it's going to offer this great community gathering space, and it's going to be another bar tavern that we need and all of these things, yet it's not going to be open when people want to go there. It's only going to be open when someone wants to pay to have an event there or for a fundraising purpose, and that's it. It's not a tap room to say, I want to go try Twyla's beer. It's only going to be open for events. I feel like that's a qualifier. I feel like that changes the use. So yes, she could have come up here and lied, but I would like to think that the people who choose to live here and do business here present themselves honestly, and I appreciate the honesty. But it's also my job to be honest back and say that what you're asking to use it for based on land use code isn't in alignment with what you're saying you're going to use it for.
What if we just say our hours are gonna be 3 to 9 limited days? Would that make it easier? Because that's basically what we're looking at. It's like, we're gonna operate from this hour to this hour, limited days.
Can
They've
I,
already did the same thing, right? They've already done that when they've decided to close because of staffing, right?
Yeah.
So my question would be for Cody with respect to how in the heck did you guys evaluate this, right? And so what is your understanding of the intended use?
so I appreciate the question. I was going to offer that if it hadn't been asked. So that's what I'd like to do. And forgot your last name, Zach.
Yendra.
Thank you. Could you have a seat?
Yeah.
I'll speak this real quick. I think it might be valuable to maybe take a step back up and reframe context. Because a lot is being discussed about a particular aspect of a business plan. And what we have in this particular scenario, there's already an existing use on the site, the Grouse Malt House, think of the current name. as a light industrial manufacturing operation that's already in existence and will continue to exist and operate on this site. The applicant has requested and proposed, they'll need additional permits, but a liquor license, variance for a bar tavern to allow this additional use that is supplementary, and associated with the existing use on the site. And they've been trying to explain the types of uses that would possibly accompany that bar or tavern use, including outdoor events and special events and other things. None of the provisions in the town's land use code determines what days a business has to be open or what hours a business has to be open. There are some limitations on certain businesses for how late a particular type of use can stay open. You know, some of the nightclubs have that. I didn't, not a complete list, but nightclubs, bars and taverns and other things do have a limitation on how late they can stay open for other reasons. But in looking at this, when town planning staff looked at this and considered what are the existing uses and are the proposed uses compatible with the existing uses and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. We looked at the existing use of the site that's proposed to remain, which is satisfied in the light industrial zone category. The applicant initially they discussed a brew pub, and town staff, for liquor licensing, I think that makes sense from a town staff perspective. Under the state brew pub definition, a brew pub can produce 1.8 million barrels of malt beverage per year. And that is a very different type of scenario than what the applicant had described to us. We felt that was a bar or tavern where they could produce their product on site, but 1.8 million barrels would be quite a different operation from a trucking, delivery, canning, kegging, other types of operations that weren't suitable for the site and the site constraints. But we supported the bar or tavern use because it's a permitted use in the light industrial zone district. When we scrolled down and we looked at the table of uses, knowing that there wasn't an exact definition for what was being described, we looked at what are the assembly uses allowed. Community facilities and religious land uses are permitted uses in the light industrial zone district. Those may be indoor or outdoor uses. So the uses that were being described by the applicant, staff felt there are other similar uses in our land use code that are permitted use by right in the light industrial zone category. So if we're generally agreeable to what was being described as being acceptable land uses on that piece of property, we said, okay, so a site plan review for redeveloping the site. And from my perspective, when you look at religious land uses, community facilities, bars and taverns, the parking considerations are still calculated based on the square footage of use type, which is what has been presented. Landscaping requirements for screening, buffering, street trees are going to be the same regardless of the use on the site. So, and I won't go into every single detail, but we basically looked at what's the whole range of uses that are proposed. Are those defined or similar to other uses that are allowed in the zone district, which staff feels have been satisfied? And so from a site plan perspective, you're looking at the physical development of the property to satisfy the minimum design requirements for physical construction. And we feel that we have done that with a couple of the conditions that were discussed as still needing some ironing out. The parking scenarios, some of the modifications to meet standards. And we feel like those can be accomplished from a physical construction and design standpoint. So from town staff's perspective, the use wasn't a significant consideration here because all the uses that have been described do fit within the light industrial zone category. We focused on what's the site plan elements and the physical construction of the site, the business operations side of things. Staff's bigger concern was knowing that the existing facilities have some capacity constraints in terms of size, occupant load, utility infrastructure. We recommended conditions that any changes beyond what's currently proposed, which appears to max out the site, that would require a whole different type of evaluation for expansion or modification of the operations. But from a land use standpoint, we felt like we were on pretty solid footing in terms of the uses being described and focused on the site plan elements.
Thank you. I think that came through for me in your report, so I appreciate that.
I know we have the parking aspect to vote on, But there are a few other elements of the conditions that I wanted to gain some clarity on and hopefully have some discussion about. The first one being C, which is revise the proposed curb gutter sidewalk design to remove the existing drain pan and build new curb gutter sidewalk to town standards. So this is something that is new in our discussions with the town and with our site plan has not been requested up until this point. And I know that Shane can speak to a little bit about the problems that ripping out the current drain pan that connects to the rest of First Street would propose. And I'm just hoping to gain some clarity on, I guess, what changed there with why that requirement is being now required.
So I can answer that. And Ms. Souls, these are the number 4, particularly the number 4, those are non-negotiable conditions of approval. Those are to meet minimum town engineering standards. I think the reason why it appears to be a new comment is in the process of review and revision on the site plans, some of the prior engineering comments had been seeking details on the design and what that looked like. And I think it was in the last plan set that we received last Wednesday that had some additional clarifications for what was proposed to meet the sidewalk connection to the existing curb and gutter. And based on the plans that were received last Wednesday, town engineering did not accept that design. So they are requiring you meet the minimum town standards for curb gutter sidewalk.
So just to confirm, if we needed to seek a alteration to the requirement, we would need to go back through the variance request in order to
So
for that to be
close,
changed. Okay.
close. If an alternative design were proposed, it has to have engineering approval for that design. It wouldn't go to the Board of Adjustments because you'd be requesting to modify an engineering standard as opposed to a land use element. So if there was a design consideration that required different consideration, that modification request would have to be submitted to town engineering and they would have to review and accept that modification. And that's a written process that we can help guide you through if that is a need.
And for D, to extend the curb gutter sidewalk to the south property corner. So you're requiring that all of the site be considered as one, even though the south lots are not included in this site review.
That's correct.
I guess, can you explain why that would be required?
The requirement is to improve your site as you're developing it or redeveloping it, and the town restricts the use of the public right of way. So our intent is that while you're designing the overall improvements and affecting the roadway, the public right of way, and the curb and gutter, to address all of those concerns simultaneously instead of piecemeal.
But we are not proposing any improvements to the south lots. And in fact, we're specifically requesting that be allowed to unfold in the future because we do not know what will exist there in the future.
Is there a reason why you can't do it now?
Because we don't know what that south lot will be developed for in the future. So we really would prefer not to put in resources to put a sidewalk that ultimately will connect nowhere because there are no sidewalks to the north or to the south of us.
And that's what the south property would tell us the same thing. You didn't require the adjacent property to extend the curb gutter and sidewalk when they redeveloped their site. So why should we connect to nothing?
But we're not developing the south lots. In fact, we're not
think the
redeveloping anything truly.
Would that requirement be there if someone else owned that property?
If it were, excuse me, I'm starting to lose my voice. As part of a redevelopment project, it's not uncommon to require off-site improvements if there's a legitimate need. And in this instance, same ownership, which makes it a little easier, but the intent here is to connect public sidewalks while they're being redeveloped in that site. It'll never be cheaper than to do it at the same time. You already have design and mobilization going on that site.
Right. So it's just a coincidence it's the same owner. But my question is, if it was a different owner, would that requirement still be there?
It may depend on the circumstances for any given site, but in this instance, we think that it would be to address the flow line for the curb and gutter and the public improvement being the sidewalk where it doesn't exist currently.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, our town
No,
engineer is
Bob
on
is
the
chiming.
Zoom call. So I didn't see that. My apologies.
Take some
but
questions from Bob.
Patty, could you advance Bob to speak?
Very comfortable making decisions.
You may try to unmute yourself, Bob, to speak.
Good evening, Planning Commission.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So what we noticed in the last submittal was that there is actually a road, a gravel road, I think it was for fire protection purposes, that extends into that south portion, at which time that appeared to be development. And we would then require that the curb and gutter be improved to that point.
Thank you, Mr. Gowing.
This is a little, is there any, as the town's going through redoing all of our sidewalks and actually doing some, what do I want to call it, water vaults that we were testing? Is there any plans for those expanding anywhere else in our town? Because, we all know that our town is flat. So do we know if there's any plans on that type of infrastructure going on in First Street or not?
I don't think at this time that we have done some pilot projects where work was already being improved on the town's construction schedule. But that's not a widespread program that we have full engineering design details on. That would,
I'm just curious.
yeah, it's not something that we've really looked at in terms of being a, regional solution. That would require a different process to consider those things.
And we need to bring it back and kind of start moving towards a vote here. I'm going to bring it back to number 2 because the parking, I don't think has been clarified and you still need guidance on number 2. It's obviously not going to be mandated. So board, what do you want? What do we need to see from the north side parking? Is everybody okay with it as it is? Is there?
I'm fine the
requirement?
way it is based on, again, the drainage. I mean, I'm not convinced that paving makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is what you call dispersed water treatment, bioswales, things like that. This is not particularly unusual. And I think, I think they're trying to make it all work. And so my perspective is I'm fine with the parking being gravel in the north and the detention facility that's also the same material and mesh in the east. So those 2 areas. So I just want to clarify. So I'm fine with that.
That's not a general consensus.
As I said before, I would rather see that part paved to the extent that makes sense. Town staff had offered the alternative of a couple of those spaces being gravel in the north plus a landscaped area or something.
Would engineering be able to run numbers in 30 days to do the stormwater calculations on what it would do to have to pave the north lots? Where does the water go? How many can we pave? Is it half gravel, half pavement? What does it do to the east side? Are those general questions? Like, am I on the right track here?
Yeah.
I think that, like we said, parking is always the big one. Those are questions I would like to see answered. Is 30 days enough time to do that?
I would defer to the applicant and their engineers. The town's review process, we typically don't allow new revisions to be submitted within 14 days of an agenda deadline. That allows a very minimal amount of time to review changes. We were able to expedite the last review set in a day. And it still resulted in a list of conditions that were recommended. So the design engineer would have to create a proposed solution or alternative to resubmit for review purposes. I can't commit to whether that would be done in 30 days or not because there's variables outside of town staff's control.
Mr. Ritchie? Correct.
But that puts town staff in a position where we're compromising our review timelines as well.
60,
Can
I
I,
would rather wait 60 than have some more complete information than have to do this again.
can I, so the mesh, is it gravel paved too? Is that the product you're talking about using? Well, we've never I mean, and that was certainly one of my concerns about whether this is ADA compatible, but apparently, and I'm not sure if people are, if this is part of it, but according to their website, first porous pavers to be ADA tested and approved. So it is an ADA surface, which is very interesting. Does that sway anybody's sense of whether that's appropriate or not? I'm looking on the website right now, and I believe that is correct.
Well, I think if it helps, it might be a little more relevant that not every parking space is required to meet accessibility guidelines. The designated ADA parking spaces are required to meet the design guidelines for ADA, and the applicant is proposing 2 ADA parking spaces that are paved in concrete with a fully accessible aisle route and ramps and the other conditions. So ADA accessibility is not a stipulation of the gravel parking areas because they've satisfied ADA elsewhere.
But apparently this product does meet the standards. So, I mean, whether it's
I don't know that for sure. I haven't really vetted that particular example, so I'm not sure I could speak to that as a fact. I haven't evaluated that myself.
It's
so
on the web. It's got to be true. No, I'm just looking at that. And so I'm just wondering if that was anyone else's concern about whether it's ADA, those gravel parking spots.
I mean, I think that part is great. If it is in fact true that that's the case, but going back to, we're trying to find a balance between what the land use code requires and meeting the drainage requirements. I would rather have the full information. And if it turns out that all those north ones need to be gravel, then so be it. But I think we need to make best efforts, and we don't have all that information. And then this may provide an opportunity for clarification on the other things that we were discussing in terms of intended use, and does that or does that not meet the zoning district?
So along those lines, conditions for approval, that negates number 2. We're not going to include that in a list of approvals because you have more, you're going to be looking at a new engineering set. So we're not going to include number 2, revised site plans to include paved parking, because we don't know that that's going to be the case.
Well, if we're gonna table it, then we don't need.
I
Is that
guess
where we're at?
That's what I would like. I would just like a little bit more solid information.
Can we include lighting on that one?
Yeah. Okay, that'd be great. So how about this?
Question, is there anything else that staff should submit in 30 and/or 60 days that anybody needs to see to make sure it's in the packet? Lighting, engineering specs on stormwater.
Absolutely.
I think if I'm hearing this correctly, and I think we should ask the applicant to weigh in too on tabling or postponements, but if that is the direction and it's agreeable, then my suggestion would be that all of the listed conditions be satisfied on the revised plan set submitted for review, so we can vet those fully and make recommendations back to the planning commission as to whether or not those have been satisfied.
Okay, except for number 2, because it may or may not happen based on engineering plans.
I think if you're providing direction to the applicant and to staff, that number 2 could be revised in such a way that says the maximum amount of paved parking to be provided and still balance the stormwater considerations.
Perfect.
Like, take this year as your guide.
Oh, is
This
anything
has
else?
been an insane year.
I mean, are we discussing conditions? Because if we're going to table it, isn't this going to be hashed out? I don't
Yes, it
understand.
will.
Okay.
So just
Staff
thoughts on-
clarification.
Gives them better guidelines to bring it to us next time.
Can I ask a question? I'm just curious. I know, and no one recludes themselves from this conversation, because you're not financially benefited by Old Colorado Brewing Company, but I am curious if there are anyone that might be not showing impartiality due to that.
Awfully loaded question.
Yeah.
I would venture to say the rebuttal to that would be As it stands right now, you face rejection of this site plan, which means you would not be able to present this again for another year. We're considering tabling this to gather more information, which is that's a benefit to you.
I think the question was related also to if a planning commissioner has any conflicts of interest, those are typically disclosed. And I didn't hear any disclosures for conflicts of interest.
I wasn't aware that Old Colorado Brewing Company had anything to do with this site plan. Am I missing something?
And is it related to the current site plan? Because I
Look into the
fear
site
we
plan.
have strayed quite a ways away from the applicant's request for a site plan consideration.
Well, I appreciate your willingness to table this and let us come back with an updated site plan in the near future. And hopefully another business in town doesn't use the name The Well in Wellington in the meanwhile.
Do I have a motion to table until the October Planning Commission meeting?
I move we table this till the October Planning Commission meeting.
I second.
Roll call.
Commissioner Scholey,
Yes.
Moyer,
Yes.
Knack,
Yes.
Carmen,
Yes.
McCaffrey,
Yes.
Whitehouse,
Yes.
Sarter.
Okay, passed.
I would ask that October meeting that we have everything we need, because the sense I'm getting from the applicant is that this has been ongoing for some time. This may be the first time it's come before this body, but if any of us are in her shoes, we'd be beside ourselves to have to deal with us.
That's not for us to say.
No, and this is the first time that
Best.
we have been seen this. In fact, Friday, I did not know this was coming. So
Nope.
I want
had
to
no
say
clue
that
till
none of
Friday.
us knew
Friday.
that it was absolutely coming. So, and we are to a standard of a site plan, and does it check the boxes? And we have been put against that a lot.
Okay, give me a second to get back on track here.
Just real quick, while you're getting back on track, the October meeting is October 2nd. Just want to throw that out there for the date. And Chairman, if you feel it's appropriate, it's 8:51. If there's a need for a quick recess before you move on to other action items, that might be prudent.
Okay, that was part of getting caught up, so.
Okay.
Yes, let's
Sorry.
take 5 minutes. Annexation and a zoning request. Annexation and zoning request for Sage Farms. Cody first.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Cody Bird, Planning Director. I've been here the whole meeting, but I'll introduce myself now. Didn't do that before. The next item on the agenda is a request for annexation and zoning. I wanted to explain a couple of procedural elements to this particular request before we dive into the meat of the conversation. In this particular, or any case, the town considers annexations, which is bringing a property from in the unincorporated county into the town limits of Wellington under the town's rules and authority. We do that at the time the property owner requests annexation into the town. When the property owner requests that, they petition the town board saying, we would like you to consider annexing our property into the town limits. And the Board of Trustees then takes an action on that petition. They have to meet, the petition has to be sufficient, meaning it meets all the statutory requirements, town code requirements, and the constitutional requirements for bringing a property out of one jurisdictional authority and into another. That petition request, along with the maps and the findings for sufficiency, was presented to the Board of Trustees, and the board adopted a resolution confirming that the criteria for an annexation petition had been satisfied, and that resolution formally started the process of considering the request. The resolution establishes the date for a public hearing for the annexation of the property. And that resolution states that the public hearing of the Board of Trustees would be August 22nd. It'll be here at the Leaper Center, 6:30 PM, August 22nd. The other thing that happens in that process is the annexation request is provided to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission evaluates the proposed annexation, the proposed use of the land, and forms a recommendation. That recommendation is forwarded to the Board of Trustees in order for the Board of Trustees to have the commission's recommendation in their evaluation for whether or not to annex the property and whether to assign zoning. Or not whether to assign zoning, but what is the appropriate zoning. Annexation proceedings are quite onerous. We've also sent quite a few required notices to various special districts, agencies, utilities. We're sending out letters for owners within 500 feet of the property. There's a lot of things that happen. We publish this in the newspaper 4 times each week. It's published 3 times already with 1 more to go. There's just a lot to annexations to guide through that process. But the Planning Commission's role is to consider whether or not it's appropriate to annex that piece of property into the town limits. And in this particular instance, we're also seeking a recommendation on zoning. When you annex a property into the town of Wellington, well, under state statutes, when a statutory town annexes property, you have to assign zoning within 90 days of annexation. The reason for that is when you bring a property out of the county and into the town, they have to know what rules and regulations are going to be applied to that property. And that's what our zoning does. So within 90 days of annexing the property, we have to then determine what zoning is going to apply to that property. In this particular instance, the applicant and owner is requesting a planned unit development overlay district. And that has a little bit more to it than just a baseline zoning district that some of our other recent annexations have gone through. Some had requested just simply C3 for a small property. Others had requested just R2. No special provisions for pretty straightforward looking types of development. And in this particular case, the property is approximately 300 acres in size. It's located along Highway 1 between the highway and the railroad tracks, south of GW Bush Avenue, south to County Road 58. Less rights of way, less a couple of farmhouses there that are under different ownerships. This particular request is proposed as 2 annexation parcels. And the reason for that is so you have two maps in your packet. One of them is 2 pages, one of them is 1 page. The vicinity map in your packet showed it really well in terms of the geographic location of these. They are contiguous. They meet the conditions for a serial annexation allowed by state law. And the reason that they were submitted as 2 different requests is because the south end of this is proposed to be approximately 58 acres of commercial property, and all the utilities are on the north end. And so it's going to take quite a bit of time for utilities to extend logically to serve that area. There's also some significant improvements that would be contemplated for which have not yet been fully designed, have not yet been fully vetted, because there hasn't been a reason to consider those things because the property is not within the town of Wellington. So it was presented as 2 different annexations for the purpose of defining the annexation agreements a little bit differently to accommodate what can be defined and determined on a shorter term basis versus what's going to take a longer period of time to fully design, vet, and decide how to handle that. So just a little bit different nuance there. But what we put in your packet is the information that's proposed for this particular annexation site. You've got a conceptual master plan that shows a kind of conceptual layout for road alignments, street alignments, parks and public spaces, and it's defined as to intended or proposed land uses. And that coincides with the planned unit development map that would be the actual proposed zoning for the property. It identifies a mix of densities for some large lot residential, some small lot residential, some multifamily that would accommodate single family attached, as well as apartments, townhomes, condos, a variety of uses. I think the applicant will present a little bit more information on that particular request then there's also the commercial aspects, with the 9.5 acres of commercial at the corner of GW Bush and Highway 1, and then the more substantial County Road 58 commercial projects that would be a later phase. This is proposed as a phase development plan. 300 acres doesn't develop overnight. The request is to zone the property, and that does a couple of things. It identifies the uses that the developer can then rely upon to go and design phases of development to satisfy what they know they're entitled to do. It also allows potential purchasers to make commitments based on the zoning that is identified, knowing that they'd have an approved allowed land use. And from a town perspective, the applicant can speak to this as well, but the original proposal was quite a bit different than what is submitted here. When they first met with staff, we had requested, you need to think a little bit bigger about this. If you propose, one of the original proposals was we'll just annex the north half of it and develop residential. And town planning staff said, wait a minute, have you looked at our comprehensive plan that contemplates these other considerations? And have you fully vetted the suggestions from the comp plan? And from the town's perspective, 150 acres or so of residential. Well, that seems okay, but we really need the commercial aspects, and we'd like to get that locked in to benefit the town and secure that future for town purposes. To the applicant owner's credit, listened to staff's suggestions and went through a couple different iterations on this conceptual master plan to help honor what the comprehensive plan had identified. There's still more design work to do, but some initial looks at the town's infrastructure master plans to contemplate the longer term projected development of this area in relationship to town facilities and town resources. So there's certainly still more work to be done as part of a phased development plan. The first step would be the annexation and the zoning. Each phase of development would then also require subsequent approvals in the form of preliminary and final plats, development agreements, public improvement design, review by town engineering and acceptance before any infrastructure could actually be constructed on site. So some of those elements, the final approvals for development will happen in the future. But the initial request starts with, is this the right property to annex into the town? Is this the right zoning to apply for this area? Some factors that the planning commission typically looks at is, where's the town's growth management area? Is it coincided with the town's future land use map considerations? How is infrastructure being handled at a macro scale? Can we provide services to those areas? And town staff has evaluated this at that high level look. It is within the town's GMA. Town planning staff worked very closely with the applicant to help refine this plan in a way that does complement the town's future land use map as contemplated in our comprehensive plan in terms of mixing densities, providing commercial where commercial was identified. And even though final design decisions haven't been made on engineering, and at least initial high level look contemplated, can we provide those services? And the answer is yes. It'll require design and installation, and the developer will have to finance that. But there is an ability to serve, and it fits within the timing for the town's water and wastewater treatment plant expansions that are underway. None of this development would come at a time where it would impact the expected schedule for those plants opening. And we would recommend, as part of the board's consideration, that no development phase or permits be issued if those plants aren't operational and able to support the proposed development. As a quick aside, because I think it's going to come up in conversation, I'll just try and beat it to the chase. The property does have 2 existing non-potable irrigation wells on site that are proposed for the outdoor irrigation requirements for all of the development. That the sufficiency and adequacy of those wells is still being evaluated by town staff. For working with the applicant to get some pump testing results and some other things that we wanted to look at to ensure that the sufficiency of those wells will satisfy the outdoor irrigation requirements for the total proposed development site. But we have reason to believe that it would satisfy that, or we wouldn't probably be considering this in the way that we are today. So still final decisions need to be made on the sufficiency or the percentage of the site that can be irrigated, but we have a good feeling that it likely will satisfy our town requirements for outdoor irrigation. I'm sure you guys have a ton of questions. There's a lot of meat in what was presented to you. We included the town's annexation impact report. That is another 30,000 foot look at, we have to provide that to the Board of County Commissioners to demonstrate that we are able to provide services and how we're going to do that. We have not received any feedback yet from the Board of County Commissioners or other review agencies. We did submit a transportation impact study to CDOT to take a look at. They gave us some preliminary feedback, which was nothing that we didn't expect. Intersections are going to need to be improved. Turn lanes will need to be added. All of them will have to be designed and installed at a later date to be determined based on timelines for development. The areas within the Northern Colorado Water Association service boundaries, they've submitted a letter to the town suggesting that they're not able to meet the service requirements for fire protection and have relinquished that site or that service area to the town to provide water service. We haven't heard anything from Elko, but this is also Elko's East Larimer County Water District. They also have some service area here that we have not heard back from them yet, but we would expect to hear from them soon. Box Elder Sanitation District is not a factor in this particular request. They have service area boundaries south of us. This area is within the town's sewer service area boundary under our 208 standards for service boundaries. And so we're confident that we can provide all the necessary services to serve development of the site in the manner in which it's proposed. That's high level. Mr. Roberson, would you like to end team?
That was high level.
That was high level.
Actually,
Down on your knees, Darren.
so my name is Darren Roberson, Tom Dugan, Mark Geffro. We all work together. High level, just so you know, 'cause you just mentioned about sewer services. When we put in Sage Meadows, we upgraded the sewer system to handle the capacity up to 550 houses on the first northern property too. So this has kind of been thought out over the last 10 years or so. We started this project probably in 2017, so you guys just got it and don't know much about it, but we truly have been working diligently with town staff, Cody, all of us engineers since 2017. And we kind of tabled it in 2019 and 20 when all the water treatment and stuff was on the verge. So kind of tabled it, kind of waiting for the town to kind of catch up. Once we did the first project, we had the first 150 acres. We thought about just doing residential and then kind of talking to Cody and working on the comp plan. It really didn't make sense. We had the first property under contract. Didn't make sense to not do them both together because otherwise you could just get hodgepodges of 150 acres and you really couldn't do any planning that the town really needs. And so we truly have been working on this for 4 or 5 years, trying to plan it correctly. We've had multiple meetings also with, I can say it, but with UC Health. I introduced Patty Garcia and Cody to Kevin Unger, had lunch with them. I've had multiple conversations. We really truly hope to bring UC Health and we're working on getting a letter from them. We'll see, but to bring them to the north or the southern edge on County Road 58. We're working with DR Horton. I think you got some plans where even though we're working on some multifamily along GW Bush and Highway 1, they have some paired housing, single family attached. That's a great product that we can bring so we can have diversity in different markets to hit.
Do you want me to share those?
You can, yeah, you can share it to them. We've also worked with the 9 acres. I mean, this is a great product line that can bring some diversification and more affordability to Wellington. And we've been in talks with them for the last probably year and a half on some product lines. So we've also already met with them and trying to plat the first 9 acres of commercial. And we really feel like the first 9 acres of commercial on the corner of GW Bush and Highway 1 can bring some added value and tax revenue. We really don't think this project is not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a 15-20 year project to make it through. Does have a well. Right now, the decree is over 400 acre feet, I think, on both of them. Obviously, they got to be tested and systems in place. And there's a lot of platting that's got to be going on. I know I'm missing something. Yeah, I mean, phasing wise, we hope to bring through the first multifamily site along GW Bush in the first 100 lots and the 9 acres of commercial over the next year and a half, 2 years. So. What else? And guys, this is probably why, I mean, we've seen this come down the pipeline. Maybe stop me, Cody, if I shouldn't say this, because I'm going to bring in another subdivision, but knowing that what we have here and the product we can deliver with the non-pot system and the diversity we can bring, that's kind of why we're trying to readdress some of the other subdivisions we're doing. So we can give a different product line and affordability to that site. Otherwise, that site's just going to sit flat and not go move forward. That's the only way some of those other sites are going to move forward since we held them so long. And the times have changed, water rates have changed, costs have changed. We need to change that some sites. And knowing that we have some diversification here and some state lots and great open space. And in that annexation agreement, I know I'm bouncing around, but we're even looking at possibly bringing in 13 more acres. You might want to explain that on how far we go.
Yes, so I don't want to go too far into the details because those decisions haven't been made yet, but one of the things that was contemplated was in this particular, I'm showing the conceptual master plan on the screen right now. One of the things that town staff brought to the attention of the applicant here, Mr. Roberson, was that the town desired to consolidate some of our regional park and open space dedications to make a more meaningful signature type of park instead of having, 3 or 4 community-sized parks spaced throughout the subdivision. The subdivision would, if approved, would still have to provide the pocket parks required for every 200 units. Those would be part of the phasing plans for each of those proposals. But what we were really trying to capture was a significantly sized regional park to really have the space to provide that quality amenity instead of spreading it thin over an area. And in doing that, what we came to realize was that this open space consolidated here, which also serves logical stormwater patterns since it's the low point of or near the low point of the site. Water is going to flow there naturally, so it makes sense to use some of that area for development, stormwater storage, the open space requirement. But what we realized was that space is 33.5 acres in size. And what I had proposed to the developer was maybe that 33.5 acres, even though it's nice to have it all in one space, maybe it would be helpful to offset some of this more prime type of development land for a strategic location within the town where we might also need parks and recreation services. And so we asked the developer to consider looking at another property in town that the developer might be able to acquire and dedicate as open space in return for an offset of some of the open space in this particular development. None of that's been approved yet. It was just a concept. We intend to, if things move forward, to present that to the Board of Trustees, Parks Advisory Board, Planning Commission to weigh in on that. But we wanted to think outside the box and use best resources for the town to reasonably accommodate all of the community needs through development proposals and not put all of our recreational resources on the very south end of town when some of those areas need to be more centrally located. So that was an out of the box thought that we threw out there and still needs some further.
And we're still working on the land. We have some land under contract, but we want to get through all the meat of it first.
For like the whole house.
Guys, I don't want you to think we've been, this just happened over the last year and a half. We've been really working. Hey, we just build your big pond track F, so. But we've been here for 23 years now. I mean, to us, we wanted to really make a subdivision that could be impactful to the whole community, to the edge of Wellington. And I think with Cody's help, I think we really did think outside of the box and can, if we just would have done the next section of land and it just would have been just a hodgepodge like it's kind of been going. And so we're trying to think outside that box and bring some real value to the community. So I know there's gonna be questions. I mean, not like we've Didn't expect some, but we don't
I-
want to table this either.
If you want to.
I have a question.
All the night, buddy.
Just out of my own personal curiosity, you mentioned mixed market rate and the paired homes. I'm just curious what the price point on some of those units, like ballpark. I know the market changes, but
I think right now, I think we can get some product in the 4s. You know, I mean, I don't think you can build anything under 4 in northern Colorado. That's kind of why we're re-annexing some of this other stuff on other lands to make it affordable. But then think you also want to have some houses where people have families or people want to retire and downsize, and you know, there'll be some houses 6, 7, 800,000 like there is in Sage Meadows. And that's kind of why you have the estate lots on Highway 1 that go across from Cottonwood Shores. It's gonna be a great project. And diverse. You guys haven't seen this before. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question. I mean,
yeah.
the market will dictate the pricing, but if we can give more affordable lots at a lesser price and I think you guys need to see more density in some areas, but not all areas. And you guys, that's why you don't see 19,000 square foot lots anymore. They're just not a value, you know? And having a non-pot system also keeps the fees down, so the housing can be more affordable.
A few 19,000 square foot lots are appropriately located.
Well,
You've
and
got
that's
some
kind of why
large
we
lot-
factor in big lots. And who's to say we don't maybe make that whole street? Or you bring in a landmark homes and give it a different look? Or there's a lot of local builders that I think we want to be in control of this, guys. We're not looking to flip this to someone else. I mean, I've lived here my whole life. We want to deliver some great product. So,
I know you're shocked that I have questions.
pardon me.
I said, I know you're shocked that I have questions.
Are they about
I
annexation?
thought you'd be wore out by now.
Annexation questions.
Oh, only annexation questions?
All we're looking at.
Yeah.
I thought we're
Yeah,
doing
just-
zoning.
And the PUD
Oh, yeah, the
zoning.
PUD, right.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Well, they go together, so this,
Well, okay,
you know.
We need to have.
okay. Well, so first of all, thank you, just because I know that you're thoughtful and I appreciate it. So concern on zoning. And this is something that we went through when we did our rezoning. There are no buffers. So C1 is a natural buffer between residential to C3. And I know these are like, it's not to scale. I can only imagine how big your commercial area is, but is it possible for part of that to be zone Z1 that's C1 that's closest to the residential so that we have that easing in from one to the other? That's the intended use of a C1 zone that isn't used very often previously. I would just like to see if as you're doing thoughtful planning that we're doing a little bit of that.
I think what, as we get further into doing some of the planning, we're going to use landscape buffers between the different zone uses. And so that'll create a lot of buffer.
I still think
instead
we
of
need
different
some
uses.
community commercial that's next to the community.
I think, on the south half, we will have those uses down there. They're allowed in the C3 zone also.
What are
So-
some examples that you envision?
Like coffee shops, taverns, convenience centers, like a 7-Eleven or Quick Stop, those type of uses.
And
Do you
I-
see where I'm going here?
I do, and I wanted to throw out something else too that I didn't touch on earlier, so my apologies. As part of a plan unit development overlay district for the zoning, it's intended to accomplish something that a baseline zone district wouldn't otherwise accomplish. And so Commissioner Cholet, you're referring to our baseline zone standards, and C1 is one of our baselines for neighborhood commercial. One of the planned unit development goals was to modify some of the permitted and proposed or permitted and prohibited uses. And so that is accomplished, or the proposal is accomplished in the PUD document where it actually says, this is what the C3 zone district means. And it largely mirrors the town's C3 zone district, but there are some specific modifications, additions, omissions for particular uses, modifies some of the setbacks that are required of our normal zone district standards. So there are some nuances within the PUD language that was intended to be supportive of that blending of uses between the different district characterizations knowing that the full design details aren't yet known, but to provide some flexibility for, it could be this and it could be that, but this is what it's limited to in this document. So it's just a little bit different than some of our standard zone district categories in the sense that they're proposing some modifications for consideration.
I guess my concern more to you, not to you, is that there was robust discussion when we were doing the rezoning around the fact that we hadn't implemented that C1 zone as a proper buffer. And yet now we have the opportunity to do exactly that, and we're not doing it again. Right? And so I think that, and I don't think C1 is a bad thing, and I don't think it all needs to be C1. I'm just saying, you know, the multifamily people, well, frankly, I don't think they want to watch the train go by, but they probably also don't want to overlook a car wash. I don't know if that's not allowed in C1. I'm just using that as an example. You understand what I'm saying? It's a quality of life thing. And I think something that unfortunately happens, not specifically here, but in general, is the people that are less fortunate than others that have to choose to live in these multifamily units end up with seeing the car washes and all of those kinds of things. And that's what the C1 eliminates the possibility of doing, is by having one small buffer between the C3 and the C and the residential that provides the more community commercial, the what's the word I'm looking for? Like not strip mall is a terrible word, but you know what I'm saying?
Continuum of uses and the intensity of
Yes,
those uses.
it's a little more gentle move from, because we can't tell somebody, well, we don't like that use, so you can't do it if it's permitted in C3, right? Like, we don't get to pick the use, right? And so just food for thought. I appreciate the outlook. And then just curious why we would put housing right along the railroad and the multifamily housing away from any potential transportation we may have someday in the future. Right, because this is tucked back in here, and the last one that we did, the replat, we specifically called out that it wasn't appropriate for multifamily housing because of its lack of access to main thoroughfares, right?
Yeah, I think our plan is, there is open space on the bottom of the train
Oh, okay.
tracks, and there's a 30 or 50-foot buffer and a sewer buffer from North Pooter and some sewer lines already in there. So even though it doesn't look like there's a buffer, there is
I believe you.
along the train tracks. And the ditch runs across through there too. Guys, we want to sell houses, and so we want to put where we think houses are best situated. And some people do want to be down and guys, when we did Columbine, it was weird. We thought we don't want any lots against the train tracks, and they were the first to sell. You know, so we've got a position how we think roadways can work. We feel like having GW Bush, putting some single family attached housing, but having the houses face GW Bush is a better look than just having a bunch of driveways too against it. And so we're trying to make it to where D.R. Horton feels like, you know, 200 door units are about work the best on that single family attached, and they will design a product that will go in there with plenty of open space, its own pool system or clubhouse just for those residents.
So that this one down here, it's not apartments, it's single family attached.
Well, we have the option of doing both, right, Tom?
Yeah. D.R. Horton considers it multifamily.
Yeah,
But and you saw the drawings that up there, they look like residential homes. They're attached units,
Okay.
but they're considered multifamily units.
And
density.
And they're not stacked units, they're side by side.
Okay. That makes sense.
And keep in mind that from a zoning perspective, if you approve a zoning district, you're defining in this case, the planned unit development, it defines the I'm stuck on commercial. The R3 as being the same as the towns with a listed set of modifications. So it lists, these are the uses allowed, these are the densities allowed, these are the setbacks allowed. That's all defined on that page 3 of the PUD document. So that would be the zoning for that property, listing the allowed uses.
And we have that?
It's on, yeah, it was in the packet, and
I
that
believe you.
it's, I admit, once I printed the 11 by 17s and gave it to you. the font, even I with my pretty good eyes have a hard time reading it
Page-
that small.
Page 58.
Need that?
We tried to provide you with
It's
a
in
lot
the-
of information.
So it's in the digital document that you can zoom in on as well. And if commissioners would like to have a full-size plot of that, I'd be happy to get it to you
It's
for
okay.
consideration also. But the text of the PUD document is in that file set. And it specifically defines the uses that are proposed, including the modifications from our baseline standards that are proposed. So the developers describing conversations with another potential purchaser for a product type that they think would be a suitable fit for these proposed locations. They would have to adhere to the zone standards adopted in the PUD if everything gets approved.
Okay, here's an easy one. What's the difference between single family C and single family B?
So single family C is a parcel that currently is being used by the gentleman that sold the property as part of his farming operations. And so he's gonna retain and lease that property from Darren basically until it's ready to be developed.
Okay,
So
That makes
we
sense.
separated that out as a different use. So there's uses under single family C that allow those existing farming operations to continue.
No, that makes sense. I like all the data. It was all exactly the same, so I couldn't figure out why it was different.
Well, if you could read page 3.
Dude, it's like, I mean, truly bifocals. Okay,
And
2 questions and I swear I'll stop.
oh, no,
Oh.
we're here to answer questions, but before we moved on, I wanted to also point out something that was a consideration that we gave for that R1C area. As a planner, my request to the owner and developer was, don't forget about it. It's someday the use will change. It won't be a silo in agricultural buildings forever. At some point, its value would change to where it would redevelop. So how would it redevelop? Have we provided access for streets? How would those lots be laid out, or at least demonstrate that they can be laid out for uses that are allowed within the proposed zoning? And so the conceptual master plan does contemplate utility and street extensions to serve that site. This doesn't say this is the way it would have to develop, but it demonstrated that the area that has existing uses on it could be redeveloped in a reasonable planner's approach type of land development in the future. And we did the same thing, or we requested the same thing in consideration for some of the farmhouses that are under a different ownership. That don't forget about them. You can't just back up to them and build a fence and then go, they're on their own to figure it out. We said we want those to be able to be integrated in some compatible way to the adjacent proposed uses. And so in this instance, being next to the multifamily, this could develop for multifamily. It could also develop for single family. Could have the same buffer for the open space and separation here. Streets are extended, utilities can be extended, all would have to be part of future design approvals and requests. But at least we've contemplated that the town would annex that someday and would be able to provide services, and we've planned for it to make sure we don't just forget about it and leave an island.
Okay. Well, I just want you to know their future planning is why I asked the question, because I was like, it looks the same, like. Okay, so on the well thing, in the packet, it says, well, first of all, what's surface water versus raw water? Because I actually have no idea.
So raw water is just water that has not been treated for.
Or I'm sorry, treated water versus surface water.
So, yeah, so treated water means it's been treated at the town's wastewater water treatment plant. We treat wastewater also, but different process. So it's for drinking purposes. It's
Right.
potable water. Surface water is, or raw water is water that's not been treated. So it could be irrigation water. Surface water is referring to water that's delivered from a reservoir via ditch or some other, pipe or conveyance. It's rainwater that has fallen on the ground, been piped, conveyed to reservoirs through pipes or channels to a site, but it's different than well water and it's different than treated water.
Okay.
Was that lengthy enough explanation?
Yeah, I really just didn't know what surface water was, so thank you. Okay, and then I noticed that we address law enforcement and how it very nicely lays out that somehow budgetary, we will find a way to accommodate potentially 900 more homes at some point. But did we discuss how it impacts the fire department? Or has the fire department been asked about the potential impact of this?
That's not a service that the town provides. And so our annexation impact report doesn't provide how other districts would provide their services. They would have
Okay.
to vet that and propose that, but they are a Title 32 special district, so they've received a notice and our proposal for annexation. We have not yet received feedback from them.
Okay.
But the fire department was made aware of this site 2-3 years ago. They actually wanted to buy a site on County Road 58, possibly for a firehouse. So I mean, they're aware of it. They want to see it because they get impact fees from it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of on the same line of being a district, but, and I see that the school district did respond back to you about the schools, but I do kind of wonder, where would schools go? Especially going south. They won't.
The last conversations we had with Purdue School District's planning staff, when they purchased and annexed and zoned the property for the current middle high school, they purchased enough land there that from their planning staff said this would be the future location for a future middle school. The high school would become a standalone high school, not a high school middle combo. And they've contemplated a future elementary school at that location. So that was at the time, I won't hold them to it because we know plans change, but that was the consideration that the school district informed town staff that they would desire to locate a middle school and elementary school on that campus setting. And that from their projections and perspective, when that time came to issue bonds for those improvements, for those builds, that would satisfy the student population needs for Wellington for the foreseeable future. Again, we won't hold them to it because we know plans change, but currently they've indicated that they didn't desire land in this instance, but they would request the payment in lieu of land, or payment in lieu of land fees to have funds to purchase operations, do all the things that the school district needs to do.
I see that. Okay.
And Linda, the money that they pay, because I contacted the CFO today, because I sit on the budget advisory committee. So I was curious what happens with that money. So that money is held in a fund that's very heavily restricted, that is for future land purchase in Wellington or infrastructure improvements to then thus build an elementary school if they so chose to do it on that other campus or whatever. So the money still stays here in Wellington. This development satisfies what it would have had to satisfy anyway.
Can't possibly be just.
No, so it sounds like you've been working on this for quite a while, which is not surprising. So I'm just looking at the last sheet, which is Northern Colorado Water. I'm not surprised that they said they couldn't provide water because they've got their tap moratorium going on. Is that correct? December 21st, 2022? It's the last sheet in the packet.
Yes.
So okay, it's a few years ago. Okay, yeah, I'm just curious.
6 months, 8 months ago.
Oh, time flies. Oh, never mind.
We did have one from, we did have one from 2020, but I had them updated.
I saw that too. I think there was a pretty quick copy and paste and didn't update for current staff, but
I think that's what confused me.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't even notice.
Again, like I said, we were going to bring this forward in 2019, 2020. We kind of put it on hold. I can tell you right now, we closed on the last parcel, the last southern parcel in April of 2022. We contemplated not closing on it and just doing the 150 acres and not doing any of the commercial just because of the uphill battle, just politics, water problems, wanting to retire and not be here for 20 years. But this will give my kids something to do. But there's been a lot of thought put into this and at the end of the day, there will be changes and we look at this project and that's kind of why we need the PUD overlay. Because we don't know what's gonna happen in the next 10 or 15 years. And we want to be able to adapt as things need to. Depending on if UC Health comes in or someone else comes in, we can adapt on the commercial. We need that kind of protection too.
Where do you envision UC Health coming in?
We see UC Health, we've been talking to them about them bringing in a campus here.
Yeah, I like what you have here. I think it's great. I like seeing the open space, significant open space, multifamily, commercial. I do like Lisa's idea of the C1. I think that makes sense. I think it's safer to have a clearly defined C1 for commercial than to have a C3 mixed and then hope someone puts in something that makes sense for C1. So other than that, I think
Just for clarification, Darren pointed out to the UC Health there on the south end by County Road 58.
Do you have that map of 9 acres of kind of what we're proposing on outlots for the commercial?
Yeah, it's so hard to switch screens here, but let me.
Cody, while you're doing that, I apologize. I skipped over. I didn't really skip over, it, but we didn't plug in any public comment. Is there anybody who wish to come up and make any comments on this one? Good, you good, Melissa? Thank you. Okay, all right, awesome. Thank you, guys. Just checking.
This is kind of what we got proposed right now, kind of talking with bringing in 9 utilities into 9 parcels that we can. We see this commercial going fairly quickly as we bring forward the first couple phases.
Can't have a coffee shop in there, you have 3.
Yeah, no more coffee shops.
No, that's just but we think there needs to be a gas station. Probably.
restaurant in there?
Why?
Proposed restaurant.
And keep in mind that this is,
conceptual.
yeah, it's almost hard to see it for the watermarks, but not for construction. This is a draft concept that a potential commercial developer put together because of their interest in the site. And my initial first blush was, yeah, maybe I even asked him to say, what's your initial proposal included didn't really line up with the town's design criteria for commercial sites. I asked him to modify it, even though it was a draft, and they were willing to do that. So, but these are placeholders for potential commercial development that hasn't been vetted through our normal site plan process. We still have a lot of work to do.
No, stop giving them all the money.
And from a conceptual standpoint, what town staff was mostly looking at on a conceptual proposal like this was, I looked at the building footprints. Does that support the scale that would be adjacent to the proposed other uses? Will it provide for the mix contemplated in the zone district, the PUD standards? Does it have opportunities for a variety of uses compatible to the scale of the surrounding environment? Does it, will it meet the need? But the actual, like, I think one of them is a proposed auto parts store. Typically, in my experience, what people do when they conceptualize these is they take a known entity with a known footprint size for their standard model and they plunk it down and say, we can design a lot with the adequate parking and building footprint to support that type of a use. But
Clearly hadn't driven through our
it
town.
may
so
very
we
well
know
be a
which one it
different
is.
type of use. So I wouldn't get too held up on the specific details of what use is identified. It's really just illustrating that there is sufficient space to make a meaningful commercial development for uses that would fit the scale of that particular location.
And having the roadway with the right in, right out, so the fire department had access.
And so is your sense then, Cody, with leaving it C3 by showing this and leaving this C3 that provides for the flexibility that might be needed? So that we don't have a C1? Is that what you're thinking?
Well, I the C3 is the mixed use commercial under our normal standards that contemplates a variety of uses and scales and intermingling of compatible uses as opposed to complete separation of incompatible uses. So I do think that the C3 zone district provides more flexibility than it once did in the past. Our land use code update provided more flexibility there. But the PUD the proposed PUD standards does contemplate changing some of those uses from what is established. And I had it up a minute ago, and I can certainly go back to it if you wanted to take a look at those permitted uses. This section here is the C3. As you can see here, maybe I make that even a little bit larger. It is hard to read on that monitor up there. But this is the C3. It talks about referencing the town's C3 standards and then modifying it as listed below. So would allow a variety of different uses compatible with surrounding proposed in zoning categories, including grocery stores. This 25,000 square feet mirrors the language in the land use code for that particular type of a retail facility. Childcare, medical office. The accessory dwellings would be associated with the, actually, we should take a look at that because we'd need single family to have an accessory dwelling. We don't have accessory to multifamily typically. And then some specific prohibited uses that may not be compatible with the surrounding proposed developments. This was the short-term rental is one that staff's going to provide some additional recommendations on too. We don't recommend defining that differently in this PUD document because we don't have those standards or anything else. That's a really big policy level decision that we don't want to define in a specific zone category. We would need to take that issue under a different context from a land use standpoint, but that's a text edit that we can clean up in this process.
Is there a particular reason why you excluded things like pawn shop, medical marijuana store, retail marijuana store?
We don't want them. Actually residential.
Okay.
I mean, we just didn't think it was.
So you're creating your own buffer.
That's kind of what the PUDs were outlining, restricting certain uses. One of them was marijuana, because we do in a pawn shop.
Golf courses aren't really compatible with the area. I mean, so, and
It'd be
veterinary.
nice if we had our own golf course to go with our own swimming pool.
And you know what, we still might be wrong on something and we might have to come back. It's that big of a project, but Cody's been, I mean, I cannot rave about how much Cody's knowledge and helpfulness is and planning and then sometimes we butt heads and we disagree, but it is intended for the town and for good development and he's a huge asset for us too.
I'd like to see some long-term care and assisted living and patio homes.
So guys, if
We
we
have
can,
none of that.
and we got stuff for patio homes, but we actually think if we can bring UC Health in, then we can also do some long-term care housing on that commercial too, on that bottom corner. And guys, if you look at the open, if you pull back the open space and all the commercial along 58, the problem with the other 150 acres is if you follow those roadways where the single family is, that is about the point where you cannot get sewer to any houses. So that farm really was never going to develop unless we brought them all together so that we can get our density on the northern property and then have commercial on the southern property with some single family, but no one's going to come in 5 or 10 years for that a limited amount of houses and rooftops, hoping that commercial is going to come. So just because your sewer plant, you need a lift station to make any of that work. So instead of having an open space on the northern property with, 350 houses, by doing them both together, we can give it such a more diverse product. Hopefully we can bring you guys in 13 acres of better land for a better pool. And
Can I have that on the record?
or, whatever the town decides to do with it. And then take maybe 13 acres off of that open space curve that's right next to hopefully the care housing or something and put some commercial or multifamily there too. So
the way it's drawn satisfies the open space commitment as is.
As is.
The idea is if you acquire the 13 acres, then it comes off at a later date.
why do you want 20% open space for a huge park that's on the edge of town?
Yeah, just clarifying, yeah.
Well, some of us live closer to that park than the one that's on the north end of town.
We're gonna live in 20 years.
Yes, because I can't afford to move.
You're gonna live in
anywhere else.
the healthcare housing, long-term housing. But you know, so yeah, I mean, it would be a huge anchor to bring a UC Health. I mean, I know Kevin pretty well. There's a lot of politics that need to play out. That's why I introduced him to Patty and Cody. We tried to have a letter of intent or something from UC Health, but I mean, and they know the next 6 to 10 years, they better be looking now because they want to capture the north side of Fort Collins, and they will capture all that too with everything going in if they have that location. So.
Okay, not to beat a dead horse, but I just need you to answer one more question about the C1 thing. In what circumstance would we have an applicant standing here with a PUD that you would have C1?
I'm not sure I understand. Could run it by me again.
C1's not included in this PUD overlay. I'm asking you, in what circumstance would we see that C1 based on what we've been told the intention of that C1 is? In what circumstance should I expect to see that C1 in this in this type of application?
Are you referring to the uses or the title? Because again, I think what.
The zoning district C1 is intended to be a buffer between residential and mixed commercial, intended for highway heavy traffic use, right? So in the past, that's people hodgepodge, right? Oh, I'm gonna put this here, and they get the zoning they want and they put it up, and it's one plot of land that makes no sense with anything around it. And now we're supposed to be doing all this stuff in a more future thinking, well thought out way. And this is great. And I love it. But there's no C1 included. So my question is, when would I see C1? When would I expect in a development like this to see a C1 zone district proposed as the buffer before the C3?
When there's not a PUD is what I understand.
Well, partially, because in this proposal, the PUD is intending to define the mix of uses that create the compatibility at the transition between one zone to another zone. But if you look at our existing town zoning map, the C1, a lot of that is defined along 6th Street, where you have highway commercial type uses and then residential in close proximity. And the C1 created a step down. So it was offices, medical facilities, dentist offices and things before the residential. So the residential wasn't immediately adjacent to drive-throughs and other highway type uses. So that's where you typically see that neighborhood commercial type zoning category is where you're transitioning from a more intense use down to a less intense use.
Right. So that's why I'm asking why we don't see that here.
Because in the overall context of this development plan, so let me take it at a higher level. C1 might be seen between C3 and residential. In this particular development proposal, the effort was made and the desired intent for the overall development was to transition from a higher intensity residential to a lower intensity residential, to transition from the higher intensity commercial to the commercial corner to a higher intensity residential. Instead of going from single family detached straight to commercial and drive-throughs, they're proposing to use the higher density or medium density residential as the transition instead. So if this doesn't become the multifamily, it could become a C1 zone to transition from C3 to C1 to R2. That is a different approach to what is currently proposed in this particular scenario, but in this development intent was to seek the residential instead of the C1.
Okay. I mean, it's fine. I'm not gonna not approve it. But I want to be on the record that moving forward, if we're not gonna use C1 in an opportunity where we have a chance to actually plan smart and thoughtfully, then I'm not sure why we have it, is pretty much where I'm at. Like, I don't think people who have to choose to live in higher density housing, because it's more affordable, should be used as a buffer between high intensity commercial use and the people that can afford a single family home. I think that's inappropriate.
Isn't it fair to say that the PUD is what's controlling this? Because on the southern end, there is no multifamily between the single family and the commercial. But the PUD is what's controlling what goes in the C3. So in the absence of a PUD, then it would make sense to see a C1.
Right?
But because there's a PUD that's modifying the C3, because it's not C3 as defined, it's C3 modified by the PUD, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. And
I
another
don't know if that makes
example,
sense.
another example could be, if you had a light industrial category, you wouldn't want residential next to it. That would be another opportunity to add C1 zoning to transition from light industrial down to residential. There's no light industrial or industrial proposed in this particular development. So, I mean, it eliminates some of the areas where C1 would make sense. If you look at the proposed layout here too, you've got a lot of the commercial edge is located next to open space and parks where you don't need a step down of the intensity
I'm more concerned with
Right.
this side over here.
on the
side
north side.
To all the multifamily housing.
Right. So the C3 zone is the mixed use zone district that includes residential uses in it. So residential uses in a C3 zone would be generally compatible with residential.
I have specifically seen people who have asked for a rezone to a C3 that were told no specifically because they were already C1 and it was an appropriate buffer that needed to stay in place. So that's why I'm asking the question. I'm not going to ask you to change it. I'm not going to not approve it.
So do we have a motion to approve?
Not yet, but I want to set a standard in case you decide to develop more, that I think it's important that we're as cognizant of our multifamily users as we are of our single family users. And we're not using lower cost housing as a buffer for car washes and drive-throughs and all the other things that are permitted in C3 uses that are not fun to live by. And as someone who used to be in that kind of housing, I'm speaking from personal experience.
I think in this particular case, both the multifamily and the C3 uses will come before the board as a site plan review. And I think when we design those, we'll definitely have buffers in between those uses.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything? I get a motion to approve.
Does anybody have it? That's over here.
Well, while you're contemplating that, the recommendation of the planning commission will be forwarded to the Board of Trustees for consideration at their public hearing on August 22nd to be held here at the Leaper Center at 6:30.
Does anybody have it? Somebody just give me the words.
Loaded with too much knowledge.
Wow. I got all my stuff mixed up.
Can I have a motion to approve?
I make a motion to move forward with the recommendation of approval to the Board of Trustees to annex the Sage Farms annexation and the Village at Sage Farms annexation into the town of Wellington, and to amend the official zoning map of the town to include the annexations as PUD planned unit development based on the findings for approval.
I second.
Roll call.
Commissioner Sholay,
Yes.
Moyer,
Yes.
Mac,
Yes.
Carmen,
Yes.
McCaffrey,
Yes.
Whitehouse,
Yes.
Sarter.
Yes. Yeah, I know you don't. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Darren, everybody. I just close it up. Announcements?
Just a couple of quick things I wanted to communicate. Public hearing for annexations, August 22nd, said that a couple times. The next meeting is September. The normal planning commission date's the first Monday, which is Labor Day. So the advertised next meeting of the planning commission is September 11th, the following Monday. At this time, we don't have any site plans that have been submitted for that particular meeting. I do anticipate, as long as all the review processes go well, it's likely or possible to have the final plat for Saddleback subdivision. The Planning Commission had heard that a month or so ago, and the board had approved the preliminary plat and the zoning. So the applicant is working on submitting for the final plat. If it's ready, it could be on the September 11th agenda. If it's not ready, we'll let you know if the meeting needs to be canceled. And, oh, the last thing I was going to throw out there, I know it's late. Thanks for sticking with me. The statewide planning conference is coming up here at the end of September. And we did contemplate in the planning department budget the opportunity to help fund a planning commissioner or two, depending on how many days you want to go, to attend some of the planning sessions in the state planning conference. I think it's in Loveland this year. So it's close transportation.
Springs.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. It's in Colorado
Yeah,
Springs. Sorry, a little bit more travel. But I wanted to throw it out there as an opportunity. If a planning commissioner is interested in attending that, there are usually some good sessions for commissioners to pick up on information there too. So let me know if you're interested. I can get you an itinerary and the dates and the logistical coordinations. I probably only have budget to send one, maybe two, but I'd be interested in doing that for you if there's interest. So reach out to me, let me know.
Okay, anything else?
That's all for me. They're doing their thing. They've received all their approvals. They've had a building permit issued. I think they're just working through contractor timing and availability to advance next steps, but
Yeah. Looking a little rough over there.
they've received all their town approvals, and it's just in the contractor's hands for how they schedule their work.
Adjourned.
They must have got the site drainage sorted. There, they are contractors.
So I don't forget to ask.